Before the story begins, I need your support. For the next 7 days, you can help this video reach new viewers by simply clicking the encourage button. That one click gives this video the boost it needs to climb the Rising Creators leaderboard and get discovered by thousands of new people. If you enjoy my content, please take a second to encourage this video. It truly makes a huge difference. Thank you. The first snow of the season arrived without ceremony, falling in thick curtains across the black mirror surface of Jackson Lake. I stood at the window of the Coulter Bay Visitor Center, watching the flakes dissolve into the water while steam rose from the coffee mug warming my hands. 6 years with the National Park Service, 4 of them here among the Tetons, and I still found myself pausing at moments like this when the world went quiet and white and the mountains seemed to hold their breath. My name is Mason Hendricks, and I have spent my adult life learning the language of wilderness, the way a forest speaks through the rustle of aspen leaves, the distant bugle of an elk, the particular silence that falls before a storm. I thought I understood that language. I thought the wilderness had shown me all its secrets. I was wrong. The station radio crackled with the morning weather report out of Jackson Hole. Temperatures dropping through the 20s, wind chill advisory in effect by nightfall, accumulation of 8 to 12 inches expected. Nothing unusual for mid-November in the high country, but enough to close most of the backcountry access points and send the last of the seasonal staff down the mountain for winter. I was one of 4 rangers remaining until spring, a skeleton crew to monitor the frozen landscape, assist the occasional cross-country skier, and wait out the long months of darkness that settled over the northern Rockies like a held breath. I finished my coffee and began my morning equipment check, a ritual so ingrained it required no conscious thought. Flashlight batteries full, GPS unit charged and calibrated, emergency beacon functional, radio clear on all frequencies. I tested the channel to dispatch, received confirmation from Garrett Dalton's familiar voice, and noted the time in my logbook. The routine was a kind of prayer, I sometimes thought. Small acts of preparation against the vast indifference of the wilderness. Outside, the temperature had already dropped 3 degrees since dawn. I pulled on my insulated parka and stepped onto the wooden deck, my boots leaving the first prints in the accumulating snow. The air carried that particular scent of high country winter. Pine resin sharpened by cold, the metallic promise of more snow to come. The faint organic undertone of the lake preparing to freeze. The Tetons rose above the tree line like broken teeth, their peaks already lost in the low-hanging clouds. I had seen them 1,000 times, but they never failed to remind me how small I was, how temporary, how easily the mountains could swallow a man and never give him back. Familiar sounds filled the morning despite the snowfall, the distant honking of the last Canada geese heading south, the creak of cold-stressed branches, the soft percussion of snow landing on snow. I walked the perimeter of the visitor center, checking the building's winterization, ensuring no wildlife had found its way into the storage sheds. A set of wolf tracks crossed the parking lot. 3 animals, maybe 4, heading northeast toward the Moran Junction. I photographed them for the wildlife monitoring database, noting their size and spacing. Healthy pack, well-fed before the lean months. I knew these wolves, or at least knew of them. The Teton Pack, we called them, though wolves respected no human boundaries or names. Back inside, I reviewed the trail registry from the previous day. Only 1 entry. Caleb Reeves, solo hiker, signed in at 6:47 a.m. for the Paintbrush Canyon Trail. Signed out, blank. I checked my watch, 8:15 a.m. He would have had to leave before dark yesterday to reach his car, and the parking lot at String Lake had been empty when Logan Sullivan drove past at closing. I felt the first small needle of concern, the professional instinct that preceded conscious worry. I keyed my radio. "Dispatch, this is Coulter Bay. Over." "Go ahead, Coulter Bay." Garrett's voice was steady, unhurried. He had been with the Park Service longer than anyone I knew, 23 years in various postings, the last 7 here at Grand Teton. If anyone could read the weather of a situation before it broke, it was Garrett. "I've got an unsigned trail registry from yesterday. Solo hiker, Paintbrush Canyon Trail. Can you run the vehicle registration for the String Lake lot? Should have been 1 car there overnight." A pause. "Checking now. Static." Then, registration comes back to Caleb Reeves, age 28, address in Bozeman, Montana. Emergency contact listed as David Reeves, father, same address. "Copy that. I'm going to take a drive up to the trailhead. Verify the vehicle's still there." "Understood. Check in at 30-minute intervals. Weather's coming in fast." Logan's already at Jenny Lake. He can provide backup if needed. I grabbed my pack, already loaded with emergency supplies, a habit bordering on compulsion, and headed for my truck. The snow was falling harder now, beginning to erase the world's edges. As I pulled out of the lot, I noticed the silence that had settled over the forest. No birds, no wind through the pines, just the hiss of snow against my windshield and the growl of the engine. I told myself it was the weather. Animals go quiet before a storm. It meant nothing. The drive to String Lake took 20 minutes on roads already growing treacherous. The plows would not run until the snow stopped, and the accumulation was building faster than predicted. I passed the turnoff for Jenny Lake, caught a glimpse of Logan's truck parked at the ranger station there, and continued north toward the Paintbrush Canyon trailhead. The forest pressed close on either side, lodgepole pines and Engelmann spruce wearing their first white coats of the season. Through gaps in the trees I could see the lake, its surface pewter gray and restless with the falling snow. Caleb Reeves had chosen the Paintbrush Canyon Trail for its challenge. That was what the registry suggested anyway. He had noted his experience level as advanced, his planned route as the full loop connecting to Cascade Canyon via Lake Solitude, a 16-mile trek through some of the most demanding terrain in the park. In summer, it was a popular route, well-traveled and well-marked. In November, with snow on the ground and winter closing in, it was something else entirely. The kind of hike that separated confident from foolish, that tested everything a person thought they knew about themselves and the wilderness. I found his car exactly where the registration said it would be. A silver Toyota Tacoma parked at the trailhead, already wearing a white cap of snow. I checked the hood. Cold. It had not been started in hours, probably since yesterday morning. I tried the doors. Locked. Inside, I could see a water bottle in the cup holder, a fleece jacket folded on the passenger seat, a dog-eared copy of some paperback novel on the dashboard. Someone expecting to return. I radioed dispatch. Vehicle confirmed at trailhead. No sign of the hiker. I'm going to head up the trail, see if I can make contact. Copy Coulter Bay. Be advised, visibility is dropping. We're looking at whiteout conditions within 2 hours. Understood. I'll stay on the main trail. Turn back if conditions deteriorate. I shouldered my pack and started up the trail, following the blue diamond blazes that appeared at regular intervals like a trail of breadcrumbs leading into the white unknown. The snow had already accumulated 3 inches, enough to obscure any tracks from the previous day. If Caleb Reeves had come this way, the evidence was gone. The forest closed around me as I walked, the familiar landscape transformed by weather into something older and stranger. I knew these trails, had walked them dozens of times in every season. But the snow had a way of rewriting the world, erasing landmarks, making the known unknown. I moved carefully, checking my GPS every few minutes, confirming my position against the map in my head. 30 minutes in, I found the first anomaly. A set of tracks crossed the trail ahead of me. Human tracks, boot prints pressed deep into the snow. Fresh, no more than an hour old based on the accumulation in the impressions. They came from the west, crossed the trail at a perpendicular angle, and continued east into untracked forest. No blazed trail ran east-west here. I checked my map again. Nothing. I photographed the tracks, noted the coordinates, and continued north. The prints had been heading away from the trail, deeper into the backcountry, away from any logical route back to safety. They were also wrong in a way I could not immediately identify. The spacing was off, too regular, too precise, like someone walking to a metronome rather than navigating rough terrain. Another 15 minutes passed. The snow intensified, cutting visibility to perhaps 50 yards. I could feel the temperature dropping, the cold finding its way through the seams of my parka. I was beginning to calculate the point of no return, the moment when continuing the search would become more dangerous than abandoning it, when I heard the voice. "Hello? Is someone there?" A man's voice, coming from somewhere off the trail to my left, weak but clear. I stopped, trying to pinpoint the direction. "Hello? This is Park Service. Call out again." Silence. Then, from my right, "Please, I need help. I'm lost." The same voice, the same man, but the direction had changed. I stood very still. Sound could do strange things in snowfall, bouncing off trees, distorted by wind, creating illusions of location. I knew this. I had trained for this. but there was no wind. The air was utterly still, the snow falling straight down like a curtain being lowered across a stage. I keyed my radio. "Dispatch, I've got possible voice contact with the missing hiker. Attempting to establish location." Static answered me. Not clean static. Something underneath it. Something that almost sounded like breathing. "Dispatch, do you copy?" The static shifted, formed itself into something that might have been words. "Come closer, Mason." I checked the radio's frequency. Correct. Checked the battery. Full. The equipment was working. The problem was somewhere else. "Hello," I called again into the forest. "If you can hear me, stay where you are. Keep calling out." This time the response came from ahead of me, from the direction of the trail itself. "Mason, I'm right here. I've been waiting for you." I knew that voice. Garrett from dispatch. But Garrett was 30 miles away at the Moose Visitor Center. Garrett, who had been on the radio with me not 10 minutes ago. Garrett, whose voice now came from somewhere in the trees ahead. Impossible and wrong. "Mason, come find me. I'm so cold." I did not move. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I had been trained better than that. Panic kills faster than cold, faster than hunger, faster than any predator in these mountains. I forced myself to breathe slowly, to think clearly, to assess the situation like the professional I was supposed to be. There are no supernatural explanations, I told myself. Hypothermia causes auditory hallucinations. Sound plays tricks in certain weather conditions. Equipment malfunctions happen. There is always a rational explanation. But even as I formed these thoughts, I heard another voice. Not Garrett this time. Not Caleb Reeves. My mother. "Mason, honey, where are you? I've been looking everywhere." My mother had been dead for 6 years. Cancer took her 3 months before I accepted the position at Grand Teton. She had never set foot in Wyoming in her life. "Mason, just follow my voice. Come toward my voice. I've missed you so much." The sound came from deeper in the forest, away from the trail, away from any direction that made sense. And even as my mind screamed that it was wrong, that it was impossible, that it was not my mother, I felt my feet begin to move. One step, then another, toward the voice that was not a voice, into the trees that seemed to lean toward me like hungry mouths. I stopped myself, planted my feet, forced my hands into fists against the urge to walk. "No," I said aloud. "No, you're not real." The voice stopped. And then, from much closer, so close I should have been able to see whoever was speaking, a different voice. My own voice, coming from the darkness between the trees. "Are you sure?" I ran. I am not ashamed to admit it. I ran without direction, without thought, without any of the training that should have kept me calm. Trees loomed out of the whiteness, and I dodged them. Or I did not. Branches tore at my face, my coat, my hands. I could hear something behind me. Footsteps in the snow, keeping pace, never falling back. And ahead of me, somehow ahead of me, that voice, my voice, speaking words I could not quite make out, always just at the edge of hearing. My foot caught a root hidden beneath the snow. I went down hard, the impact driving the breath from my lungs. For a moment, I lay there, gasping, staring up at the white sky as the snow fell on my face. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Complete and absolute silence. I sat up slowly. The forest around me was empty. No figure pursuing me. No shape in the trees. No sign that anything had ever been there. Just snow and silence and the distant suggestion of trees fading into white. I checked my GPS. It was working again, showing my position clearly. I was half a mile from the trail, a mile and a half from the trailhead. My radio crackled, and Garrett's voice, the real Garrett, I told myself it was the real Garrett, came through. "Coulter Bay. What's your status? You missed your check-in." I keyed the radio with shaking hands. "I'm here. I'm coming back. The hiker..." I stopped. What could I say? "The hiker is..." I couldn't locate him. Visibility 0. I'm aborting the search. Copy that. Return to trailhead. We'll reassess in the morning. Logan's heading to String Lake to meet you." I stood. My body ached. My face was bleeding from a dozen small cuts. My hands had gone numb inside my gloves. I began to walk, following the GPS coordinates, not looking back. Behind me, very faintly, I heard someone call my name. I did not stop. Logan Sullivan was waiting at the trailhead when I emerged from the forest. He was leaning against his truck, a thermos of coffee in his hands, his expression shifting from concern to alarm as he took in my appearance. Jesus, Mason, what happened to you? I looked down at myself. My parka was torn in several places. Blood had frozen on my cheeks and chin. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my keys. The forest, I said. The word sounded hollow even to me. I got turned around. Visibility went to hell. Logan was not stupid. He had been a ranger for 8 years, 4 of them in Alaska before transferring south. He knew what genuine weather disorientation looked like, and he knew I was not telling him the complete truth. But he also knew there were some things you did not press, not out here, not in the cold, not when a man looked like he had seen something that had no business being seen. Get in my truck, he said. Heater's running. I'll drive you back to Coulter Bay. We can get your vehicle tomorrow. What about Reeves? Search and rescue will handle it in the morning. Storm's too bad for anything else tonight. Logan's voice was carefully neutral. They're bringing in a helicopter crew from Jackson as soon as the weather clears. I wanted to argue. Somewhere out there, a man was lost in the snow, possibly injured, possibly dying. Every hour we waited reduced his chances of survival. I knew the statistics. I knew my duty. But I also knew what I had heard in that forest, and I knew, with a certainty I could not explain, that Caleb Reeves was already beyond any help we could provide. I got in Logan's truck. The heat was almost painful against my frozen skin. As we pulled away, I looked back at the trailhead, at the trail disappearing into the white curtain of snow, at the forest that had swallowed a man and refused to give him back. The trees seemed to be watching. That night, I did not sleep. I lay in my cabin at the edge of the park, listening to the wind howl through the pines, and tried to convince myself that what I had experienced was nothing more than a combination of stress, cold, and bad weather. Auditory hallucinations were common in survival situations. The brain, desperate for patterns, could manufacture voices from the white noise of wind and snow. I had read the studies. I knew the science. But science could not explain how I had heard my mother's voice, her specific cadence and tone, the particular way she said my name. Science could not explain how the voice had known things, personal things, things that no random hallucination could generate. Science could not explain the cold I had felt when my own voice had spoken to me from the darkness, a cold that had nothing to do with temperature, that had settled somewhere deep in my chest and refused to leave. Around 3 a.m, the wind died down. In the silence that followed, I heard footsteps outside my cabin, heavy, deliberate, circling slowly around the building. I got out of bed and went to the window. The snow had stopped and the moon had emerged from behind the clouds, casting the landscape in silver and shadow. I could see the tree line clearly, could see the unmarked snow stretching from my porch to the edge of the forest. There were no tracks, but I could still hear the footsteps. Closer now. On the porch itself, Mason. The voice came from directly outside my door. My mother's voice, my dead mother's voice. Mason, honey, let me in. It's so cold out here. I did not move. I did not breathe. Mason, please, I've been looking for you for so long. And then, barely above a whisper, I'm so hungry, Mason. Won't you let me in? I stood at that window until dawn, watching the empty porch, listening to the voice that came and went, that pleaded and cajoled and eventually fell silent as the first gray light touched the peaks of the Tetons. When the sun finally rose, I checked outside. The snow on my porch was unmarked. No footprints. No sign that anything had been there at all. The search for Caleb Reeves resumed at first light. I insisted on joining the team despite Logan's objections, despite the looks Garrett gave me when he saw the state I was in. I needed to know. I needed to understand what was happening in these mountains. The helicopter found his body before noon. He was located 2 miles north of the Paintbrush Canyon Trail in a section of forest that showed no evidence of human passage. No broken branches, no disturbed snow, no tracks of any kind leading to where he lay. I was with the ground team that reached him first. I will never forget what I saw. Caleb Reeves was kneeling at the base of a large pine tree, his hands pressed against the bark as if he had been trying to push through it. His eyes were open, his mouth was open, his expression was one of absolute terror, frozen in place by the cold and by death and by something else, something I could see but not name, some final understanding that had come to him in his last moments. But that was not the worst of it. The worst was the writing, scratched into the bark of the tree, above his head, in letters that must have taken hours to carve with bare fingers. They know your name. They know your voice. They will call you home." His fingernails were gone, torn away to the quick. The bark was stained with frozen blood. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as hypothermia complicated by apparent cardiac arrest. The report noted several unusual findings: severe frostbite inconsistent with the time of exposure, unexplained abrasions around the mouth and throat, evidence of extreme psychological distress in the moments before death. Nobody mentioned the writing. When I returned to the site with the recovery team, the words had been obscured by fresh snow, as if the forest itself were hiding the evidence. I said nothing. What could I say that would not make me sound insane? I submitted my incident report with the minimum required detail. Lost contact with dispatch due to equipment malfunction. Failed to locate the missing hiker due to weather conditions. Returned to trailhead at approximately 4:30 p.m. I did not mention the voices. I did not mention what I had heard in the forest. I did not mention my mother, or Garrett, or the sound of my own voice calling to me from the darkness between the trees. 2 weeks passed. The snow continued to fall. Winter settled over Grand Teton like a held breath, and the park grew quiet and empty. The roads closed, one by one. The visitors disappeared, and we 4 rangers remained, skeleton crew holding watch over a frozen kingdom. Logan and I grew closer during those weeks. He was the only one I could talk to, the only one who had seen my face when I emerged from the forest, who knew without being told that something had happened out there. We sat in his cabin some nights, drinking whiskey and not speaking, watching the snow fall past the windows, both of us listening for sounds that should not be there. He told me about Alaska, about the things he had seen in the deep wilderness, the places where no human had set foot in decades or centuries or ever. He told me about a village he had visited during his first year, an Athabascan settlement where the elders spoke of things in the forest that mimicked human voices, that learned your name, that called you deeper into the trees until you could not find your way back. "The old stories say they are hungry," Logan said. His voice was low, his eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance. "They say the land itself is hungry, and sometimes it sends pieces of itself out to feed. They wear the shapes of people you know. They speak with familiar voices. And if you follow them, if you answer them, you become part of the hunger too." I asked him if he believed the stories. He did not answer for a long time. "I believe that there are things in the wilderness we don't understand," he said finally. "I believe that some places are older than we can comprehend, and they operate by rules we haven't learned yet. I believe that Caleb Reeves heard something in that forest, something that knew his name, and I believe he followed it. And I believe that if you heard it too, you're lucky to be alive." That night, for the first time since the search, I slept without dreams, and when I woke in the morning, I found a single set of footprints in the snow outside my cabin. They came from the tree line, crossed my porch, stopped directly in front of my door, and then they simply ended, as if whoever made them had dissolved into the air, or had been standing there all night, waiting for me to wake, waiting for me to open the door. The prints were my own size, my own boot tread. I measured them to be sure. December came, and with it the longest nights of the year. The sun barely cleared the peaks before beginning its descent, and the darkness stretched from late afternoon until well past morning. I found myself sleeping more, eating less, spending hours at my window watching the forest for movement that was not there. Garrett called me into his office during the second week of December. He looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. He had been at Grand Teton for 7 years, longer than anyone else on staff. He had seen things, I realized. He had heard things, and he had learned to live with them in a way I had not yet mastered. "I'm putting you on desk duty for the rest of the winter," he said. "No more backcountry patrols, no more solo assignments." I started to protest, but he held up his hand. "This isn't a punishment, Mason. It's protection. You went somewhere you shouldn't have. You heard things you shouldn't have heard, and now they know you." I asked him what he meant. He would not say. But before I left his office, he gave me a piece of advice that I have carried with me ever since. "If you hear your name, don't answer. If you hear a voice you recognize, don't follow. And if you hear yourself, run. Run and don't look back. Because once they learn your voice, once they can speak with your tongue, they don't need you anymore. And what they do with what's left. He trailed off. His eyes were very far away. Just don't answer, he said. No matter how much you want to, no matter how real it sounds, don't answer. I spent the rest of December in a kind of suspended animation, going through the motions of my job, filing reports, monitoring weather stations, coordinating with dispatch. I did not go into the forest. I did not walk the trails. I stayed close to the visitor center, close to other people, close to the fragile bubble of civilization we had built at the edge of the wilderness. But the wilderness did not forget me. They started coming more frequently as the days shortened. The voices, always at night, always when I was alone. Sometimes they came from outside my cabin, calling my name from the tree line. Sometimes they came from the radio, slipping between the static, speaking in tones that were almost, but not quite recognizable. Sometimes they came from the silence itself, from the space between sounds, from the darkness between thoughts. They used my mother's voice. They used Garrett's voice. They used Logan's voice. They used the voices of friends from college, of ex-girlfriends, of teachers I had not thought about in years. And always, underneath the familiar tones, there was something else, something cold and patient and infinitely hungry. One night in late December, I heard myself outside my cabin. Mason. The voice was perfect, indistinguishable from my own. Mason, come outside. There's something you need to see. I stood at my window and watched my own shape standing at the edge of the forest. It was wearing my clothes. It had my face. It was looking directly at me with eyes that reflected the moonlight in ways that human eyes should not. Mason, let me show you. Let me show you what the forest knows. Let me show you what the mountains remember. Come outside. Come home. I closed my curtains. I turned on every light in the cabin. I sat in the center of the room with my back against nothing, watching all the doors, all the windows, waiting for something to break through, waiting for the imitation of myself to find a way inside. It spoke to me until dawn. It promised me things. It threatened me with things. It told me secrets about myself that no one else could know, things I had never spoken aloud, things I had tried to forget. It knew everything. It was everything. It was me and not me, a mirror held up to reflect something that had no face of its own. When the sun rose, it was gone. But the footprints remained. 2 sets this time, mine and something else's, leading from the forest to my cabin and back again. I did not sleep well after that. New Year's Eve came and went. I spent it with Logan and Garrett in the main station, drinking champagne that someone had left in the storage closet, watching the ball drop in Times Square on a small television with poor reception. We did not speak about what was happening. We did not need to. All 3 of us were haunted in our own ways, carrying our own burdens, our own unanswered voices. The park was quiet. The forest was patient, and we waited together for the calendar to turn, for the year to end, for something to change. Nothing changed. January brought the deepest cold of the year. Temperatures dropped to 30 below zero. The lake froze solid. The snow piled so high that we had to dig tunnels from our cabins to the main paths, and still the voices came, every night, without fail. I started keeping a journal. I wrote down everything I heard, every voice, every word, every impossible thing the forest spoke to me. I thought maybe if I recorded it, I could find a pattern. I could understand what was happening. I could fight back. Looking at those entries now, I can see the progression of my own deterioration. The handwriting grows shakier as the weeks pass. The sentences become fragmented. The thoughts become paranoid and circular. By mid-January, I was barely sleeping, barely eating, jumping at every sound, seeing movement in every shadow. It was Logan who saved me. Or perhaps he only delayed the inevitable. I am no longer sure there is a difference. He found me one morning in late January, standing at the edge of the forest behind my cabin. I was wearing only my underwear. My feet were bare. The snow was up to my knees. I had no memory of leaving my bed. Mason. His voice was sharp, urgent. Mason, don't move. Don't take another step. I looked down at my feet, blue with cold, beginning to freeze. Another few minutes and the frostbite would have been irreversible. I looked up at the forest. Something was watching me from between the trees. Something with my face and my eyes and my frozen, patient smile. Come home, it said, in my voice. with my mouth. Come home, Mason. We've been waiting so long. Logan grabbed me from behind, dragged me backward through the snow. I fought him. I screamed. I called him names I am not proud of. I begged him to let me go, to let me join them, to let me finally understand what the forest was trying to tell me. He did not let go. He carried me back to my cabin, wrapped me in blankets, forced hot coffee down my throat, sat with me while my body shook and my mind slowly returned from wherever it had been trying to go. You were answering them, he said. I could hear you from my cabin. You were talking to them, Mason, calling back to them. I did not remember speaking. I did not remember anything between falling asleep and waking up in the snow. What did I say? Logan's face was pale. His hands were shaking almost as badly as mine. You said you were ready. You said you understood. You said you were coming home. I left Grand Teton the next day. Garrett arranged emergency medical leave. Logan drove me to Jackson Hole, put me on a plane to Denver, watched me disappear through the security checkpoint with an expression that was equal parts relief and grief. He knew, I think, that he would never see me again. He knew that whatever had touched me in that forest had left a mark that would never fully heal. I spent 3 months in a facility outside Denver. They called it exhaustion. They called it stress-induced psychosis. They gave me pills and therapy and concerned conversations about work-life balance and the importance of self-care. I played along. I said the right things. I convinced them that I was better, that I understood what had happened, that I was ready to return to normal life. I lied. There is no normal life. Not anymore. Not for me. The voices followed me from Grand Teton. They follow me still. I hear them in crowded rooms and empty streets and quiet nights when the wind blows just right. I hear my mother calling my name. I hear Garrett asking me to check in. I hear Logan telling me to run. And sometimes, more and more often, as the years pass, I hear myself, standing outside my apartment window, waiting at the end of dark hallways, watching me from reflections in store windows and rearview mirrors and the black screens of turned-off televisions. Come home, I say to myself. We've been waiting so long. Don't you want to understand? Don't you want to know what the forest knows? I do not answer. I never answer. But some nights, in that space between waking and sleep, I find myself reaching for the door handle. I find myself standing at the window with my hand on the latch. I find myself walking toward the tree line of whatever forest is nearest, following a path that exists on no map, answering a call that only I can hear. The hunger is patient. The hunger can wait. I know now what happened to Caleb Reeves. I know what he heard in the forest, what called to him, what led him off the trail and into the snow. He heard something that knew his name. He heard something that spoke with voices he recognized. He heard something that promised him understanding, promised him belonging, promised him a home in the hungry dark between the trees. And he answered. The same thing is happening to others. I see the reports sometimes, when I can bear to look. Missing hikers in remote wilderness areas. Bodies found in impossible locations. No tracks, no evidence, no explanation. Cause of death, exposure, hypothermia, cardiac arrest. Always the same story, always the same silence in the official records. They never mention the voices. Grand Teton National Park remains open to visitors. 2 million people pass through its gates each year. They hike the trails and photograph the mountains and camp beneath the ancient pines, and most of them return home safely, unchanged, unaware of what watches them from the shadows of the wilderness. But some of them do not return. The forest keeps them. The hunger takes them, and something wearing their faces walks the trails at night, calling out to the living, learning new voices, new names, new ways to bring the lost ones home. I do not know what the thing in the forest is. Logan believed it was the land itself, something old and vast and incomprehensible, something that exists in the spaces between what we know and what we fear. Garrett believed it was a kind of predator, something that had evolved alongside humanity, that fed on our need for connection, our longing for familiar voices in the dark. I have my own theories, none of them comforting, none of them complete. What I know is this: the wilderness is not empty, it is not silent, it is not safe. What I know is this: something in the mountains knows my name, something in the forest speaks with my voice, something old and patient and eternally hungry is waiting for me to answer, waiting for me to follow, waiting for me to come home. I have not returned to Grand Teton since that winter. I have not returned to any wilderness, any forest, any place where the silence grows deep enough to hear what hides inside it. I live in cities now, surrounded by noise and light and the constant presence of other people. I keep my curtains closed at night. I do not walk alone after dark. I do not answer when someone calls my name from places where no one should be. But the voices still find me, in quiet moments, in empty rooms, in dreams that feel more real than waking. Mason, they say. Mason, come home. We've been waiting so long. Don't you want to understand? Don't you want to know? And the terrible truth, the secret I have never told anyone, the thing that keeps me awake night after night is this. Part of me does want to know. Part of me wants to answer. Part of me is still standing at the edge of that forest in Grand Teton, looking into the darkness between the trees, feeling the pull of something vast and ancient and utterly alien. Part of me has already answered. Part of me never left. Sometimes, late at night, I call my own phone and listen to my voicemail greeting. I need to hear my voice, my real voice, to remember what it sounds like when it comes from my own mouth. I need to know that I am still myself, still whole, still human. But lately, there is something wrong with the recording. The voice sounds different, the cadence is off, the words are the same, but the meaning has shifted somehow, as if someone else is speaking through me, as if something has learned my voice so perfectly that even I cannot tell the difference. The message ends with the same words it always has. Leave a message and I'll call you back. But now, underneath those familiar words, I can hear something else. A second voice, barely audible, speaking just below the range of normal hearing. Come home, it says. Come home, Mason. We're waiting. And every night, despite everything I know, despite everything I have seen, despite every warning and every lesson and every moment of pure terror I have experienced, I find myself leaning closer to the phone, straining to hear, wanting to understand, wanting to answer. The wilderness is patient. The wilderness remembers. And somewhere in the frozen heart of Grand Teton National Park, something that wears my face is walking the trails I used to walk, speaking with my voice, calling out to hikers who have not yet learned to be afraid. Don't answer, Garrett told me, no matter how much you want to, no matter how real it sounds. But what if the thing that is calling is the only thing that knows the truth? What if the only way to understand what is happening is to follow the voice into the darkness, to let the forest take you? To become part of whatever ancient hunger lives in the spaces between the trees. What if going home is the only way to be free? I don't know anymore. I don't know what is real and what is memory, and what is the slow spreading infection of something that touched me in the snow and never let go. I only know that the voices are getting louder. The pull is getting stronger. And somewhere, in a cabin at the edge of the wilderness, a phone is ringing. I can hear it from here. It sounds like my mother. It sounds like Garrett. It sounds like Logan and Caleb Reeves and every lost soul who ever wandered too deep into the forest and never found their way back. It sounds like home, and God help me, I want to answer. If you are reading this, if you have made it to the end of my account, I have one piece of advice for you. Stay out of the wilderness. Stay away from the forests and the mountains and the silent places where humanity has never truly belonged. Stay in the cities, in the light, in the noise and chaos of civilization. And if you ever find yourself alone in the backcountry, if you ever hear a voice calling your name from somewhere it should not be, do not answer, do not follow, do not try to understand. Just run, and don't look back. Because the thing in the forest is patient, the thing in the forest is hungry. And once it learns your voice, once it knows your name, it will never stop calling. I know. I can hear it right now. And this time, I think I'm going to answer. The footprints outside my window have been there for 3 days. They are my size, my tread. They lead from the street to my door, and then they stop, as if whoever made them is still standing there, invisible, waiting. Last night, I opened the door. There was nothing there, just empty air and the distant sound of wind through trees that do not exist in this city, should not exist anywhere within 1,000 miles. But on my doorstep, there was a single pine cone, fresh and green, as if it had just fallen from a branch. And when I picked it up, when I brought it to my nose and breathed in the scent of resin and cold and something older than mountains, I heard a voice. My voice. Welcome home, it said. We've missed you." And for the first time since I fled Grand Teton, I smiled. Because I finally understood. I finally knew what the forest had been trying to tell me all along. There is no escape. There is no safety. There is no difference between the wilderness out there and the wilderness in here, in the dark spaces of the mind where old hungers live and wait and grow. The forest is everywhere. The forest is everything. And sooner or later, everyone comes home. The pine cone sits on my windowsill now. I look at it every morning when I wake and every night before I sleep. It should have dried out weeks ago. It should have turned brown and brittle and dead. Instead, it seems to be growing. Tomorrow, I'm going to Grand Teton. I've already booked the flight, already arranged leave from work, already written letters to everyone I know, explaining nothing, apologizing for everything. They won't understand, they can't, but perhaps someday, if they find themselves lost in the wilderness, if they hear voices calling their names from the darkness between the trees, they will remember me. They will remember my warnings. And maybe, just maybe, they will be strong enough to do what I could not. They will refuse to answer. Me, I'm done fighting, done running, done pretending that I can outpace something that has been hunting humanity since before we had words for fear. The forest is calling. And finally, after all these years, I am going home. The last entry in my journal, the one I am writing now, will be found on my kitchen table. Beside it will be my phone, still playing my voicemail greeting on an endless loop. The voice on the recording is no longer mine, has not been mine for a long time, but it knows my name. It knows my secrets. It knows everything that I was and everything that I am becoming. Listen closely, if you dare. Beneath the familiar words, beneath the pleasant tone, you can hear it. The breathing, the waiting, the hunger that never ends. And somewhere, very far away and very close at the same time, the sound of footsteps approaching through snow that falls forever, on mountains that remember, in forests that never forget. Come home. Come home. We've been waiting so long. This is Mason Hendricks, former ranger at Grand Teton National Park. This is my confession. This is my warning. This is my goodbye. Don't follow me. Don't look for me. Don't try to understand what cannot be understood. Just remember, if you hear your name in the wilderness, do not answer. If you hear a familiar voice where no voice should be, do not follow. And if you hear yourself speaking to you from the darkness, from the spaces between the trees, from the silence at the heart of all wild places, run, run, and don't look back. The hunger is patient. The hunger can wait. But sooner or later, it finds us all. And when it does, when the forest finally calls your name in a voice you cannot resist, remember this. You were warned. You were told. You knew what waited in the wilderness, and you went anyway. Just like me. Just like Caleb Reeves. Just like everyone who has ever heard the voices and followed them into the dark. The forest is waiting. The mountains are watching. And somewhere in the frozen heart of Grand Teton National Park, something that used to be Mason Hendricks is walking the trails, speaking with familiar voices, calling out to the lost, calling for you, calling you home. Don't answer. For the love of everything you hold dear, don't answer. I have supervised dozens of rescue missions in the Appalachians, but only one was called off without explanation. The official reason was weather, but the sky that night was clearer than I have ever seen it. What I am about to tell you happened 3 winters ago in the Olympic National Forest, and I have never spoken of it publicly until now. My name is Logan Creek, and I spent 15 years as a senior park ranger before the events I am about to describe forced me to resign. I thought I understood the wilderness. I thought I knew what dangers lurked in the deep forests of the Pacific Northwest. I was wrong in ways that still wake me screaming in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, clutching at bed sheets as if they could protect me from memories that refuse to fade. The call came in on a Tuesday evening in late November. A family of 4 had gone missing in the Elwha Valley, deep in the heart of Olympic National Forest. The Hendersons, father, mother, 2 children aged 8 and 11, They had set out on a 3-day backpacking trip and failed to return. Their car was found at the Whiskey Bend trailhead, covered in frost, the engine cold. No note, no sign of trouble, just an empty vehicle and a family swallowed by the forest. I assembled a search team immediately. Dale Hartman was my second in command, a veteran ranger with 20 years of experience in these mountains. He was built like a lumberjack, broad-shouldered and thick-armed, with a beard that had gone gray at the edges and eyes that had seen too much death in these woods. Grant Hollow was younger, maybe 30, lean and quick with a nervous energy that made him excellent at tracking, but difficult to calm down when things went sideways. Together, the three of us had conducted more search and rescue operations than I could count. We had pulled hikers from ravines, recovered bodies from avalanche debris, and tracked lost children through miles of trackless wilderness. We thought we were prepared for anything. We were not prepared for what waited in the Elwha Valley. The morning we set out, the temperature had dropped to 12 degrees below zero, unusual for November, even in the Olympics. The cold had a quality to it that felt wrong, not just frigid but hungry, as if the air itself wanted to draw the warmth from your body. I remember Dale commenting on it as we loaded our packs at the trailhead. "Too cold," he said, his breath forming thick clouds that hung in the still air. "Way too cold for this time of year." Grant checked his thermometer and whistled low. My grandfather used to tell stories about winters like this, said they only came when something woke up in the mountains. "What kind of something?" I asked, not really paying attention, focused on securing my gear. Grant did not answer. When I looked up, he was staring into the tree line, his face pale. "Just stories," he muttered. "Old stories." We started hiking at 7 in the morning, following the Elwha River Trail into the valley. The forest was dense here, massive old-growth Douglas firs and western red cedars that rose like ancient pillars toward a gray sky. Snow covered the ground in unbroken white, unmarked by any tracks. That was the first thing that struck me as odd. No deer tracks, no elk, no squirrels or rabbits or birds. The forest was empty, as if every living thing had fled. The silence was oppressive. In 15 years of ranging these woods, I had never experienced anything like it. Usually the forest is alive with sound, even in winter. Birds calling, branches creaking, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. But that morning, there was nothing, just the crunch of our boots in the snow and the ragged sound of our breathing as we climbed. Dale noticed it too. He kept glancing into the trees, his hand drifting to the rifle slung over his shoulder. Grant had gone quiet, his usual nervous chatter replaced by a tense watchfulness that made the hair on my neck stand up. We covered 6 miles by noon, following the Hendersons' planned route along the river. The trail climbed steadily, winding through stands of old growth that blocked out the weak winter sun. The temperature continued to drop. My thermometer read 18 below now, and my fingers ached despite the insulated gloves. Frost formed on my beard, on my eyelashes, on every exposed surface. Around 1 in the afternoon, Grant found the first sign of the Hendersons, a child's mitten, bright red against the white snow, lying beside the trail. He picked it up carefully, examining it. "Fresh," he said. "No snow accumulation. They came through here recently." But there were no footprints, no tracks of any kind leading to or from the mitten. It was as if someone had simply dropped it from above and walked away without leaving a trace. "That is impossible," Dale said, voicing what we were all thinking. "The snow's been down for 3 days. Any tracks would still be visible." "Maybe they were on the trail before the snow," I suggested. But even as I said it, I knew it did not make sense. The Hendersons had only been missing for 2 days. The snow had fallen on the first night of their trip. We pressed on, more cautious now. The trail narrowed as we climbed higher, hugging the side of a steep ravine. The river roared somewhere below, hidden by mist and the thick tangle of undergrowth. The trees here were older, twisted by centuries of wind and weather into shapes that looked almost deliberate, almost intentional. I found myself seeing faces in the bark, hollow eyes and gaping mouths frozen in silent screams. Just pareidolia, I told myself. Just the mind finding patterns where none existed. But I could not shake the feeling that those wooden faces were watching us, tracking our progress through their domain. At 3 in the afternoon, we found the Hendersons' camp, or what was left of it. The tent had been shredded, the fabric hanging in ribbons from the collapsed frame. Sleeping bags were scattered across the snow, torn open, their synthetic filling strewn like strange snow. Cooking equipment lay in a heap, dented and crushed as if something heavy had trampled it. And everywhere, there was blood. Not pools of it, not the massive quantities you see in movies, just splatters, sprays, dark red stains on the white snow, on the ruined tent fabric, on the exposed bark of nearby trees. It looked like someone had taken a paintbrush dipped in blood and flicked it across the campsite in wild, random patterns. "Dear God," Dale breathed, his rifle now in his hands. The safety clicked off. Grant was circling the campsite, his tracking instincts taking over despite the horror of what we were seeing. "No tracks," he said, his voice shaking. "No tracks at all." How is there no tracks? He was right. The snow around the campsite was pristine, unbroken except for the scattered debris and bloodstains. Whatever had destroyed this camp, whatever had taken the Hendersons, had done so without leaving a single footprint. I pulled out my satellite phone, hands trembling from more than just the cold. We needed backup. We needed a full search team, helicopters, dogs, everything we could get. I dialed the ranger station, waited for the connection. Static. I tried again. More static, broken by fragments of sound that might have been voices or might have been something else entirely. The phone was working. I could see the signal bars, but something was interfering with the transmission. "Phone's not working," I told the others. "We need to get back to the trailhead. Call this in properly." "We cannot leave them," Dale said. "If there are survivors, if they're injured somewhere nearby, we can't just abandon them." He was right, of course. Protocol demanded we continue the search as long as there was any chance of finding survivors. But looking at that destroyed campsite, at the blood sprayed across the snow, I knew in my gut that the Hendersons were beyond help. Whatever had happened here, it had happened fast, and it had happened violently. The chances of anyone surviving were essentially zero. But we were rangers. We did not abandon people in the wilderness, no matter how hopeless the situation seemed. We fan out, I decided. Stay within visual range of each other. Look for any sign of where they might have gone. We spread across the hillside, moving slowly through the deep snow, searching for tracks, for blood trails, for anything that might indicate where the family had gone. The cold bit at my exposed skin, the silence pressed against my ears like physical weight. I kept my rifle ready, scanning the trees, unable to shake the feeling that we were being watched. Grant found the next piece of evidence. A torn piece of fabric, bright blue like the Hendersons' tent, snagged on a branch about 7 feet off the ground. He called us over, pointing up at it. "How did that get up there?" he asked. "Why would anyone climb a tree and leave their tent fabric on a branch?" "They did not climb," Dale said quietly. He was looking at the trunk of the tree, at a series of deep gouges in the bark. Something took them up. The gouges were long and parallel, 4 of them, spaced about 2 inches apart. They started at chest height and ran up the trunk as far as I could see, disappearing into the branches above. They looked like claw marks, but no animal I knew could make marks like that. Not a bear, not a cougar, nothing that lived in these mountains. "What kind of animal has claws that size?" Grant asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I do not think it was an animal," Dale said. He had gone pale beneath his weathered tan, his eyes wide. "My grandfather told me stories about things that live in the mountains, things that come when the winter is bad enough, when people are desperate enough. Dale, this is not the time for campfire stories. This is not a story." He turned to face me, and I saw real fear in his eyes. "Logan, my grandfather was a logger back in the 30s, worked these mountains his whole life. He told me about a winter in 37 when 5 men disappeared from a logging camp. They found the camp just like this, torn apart, blood everywhere, no tracks, and carved into the trees all around the camp, they found marks just like these." "What did they think did it?" Dale swallowed hard. "Wendigo," he said. "They thought it was a wendigo." The word hung in the frozen air, strange and ancient. I knew the legend, of course. Every ranger who worked in the northern forests had heard the stories. The Wendigo was a creature from Native American folklore, particularly the Algonquin peoples, a spirit of winter and starvation, of isolation and hunger. Some versions of the legend described it as a monster, tall and gaunt with antlers like a stag and a hunger that could never be satisfied. Other versions described it as a curse, a possession that transformed humans into cannibalistic creatures driven by insatiable appetite. It was folklore, myth, The kind of story people told to explain the harsh realities of survival in the wilderness. It was not real. But looking at those claw marks, at the destroyed campsite, at the blood on the snow with no tracks to explain how it got there, I found my certainty wavering. Whatever did this, we need to report it, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. We head back to the trailhead, call in a full team, let the investigators figure out what happened. We should keep searching, Grant said, but his voice carried no conviction. If there is any chance the kids are still alive, we cannot just leave. Grant, look at this place. I gestured at the carnage around us. No one survived this. Whatever happened here, it happened fast, and it was thorough. Our job now is to stay safe and get help. He nodded reluctantly. We gathered our gear and prepared to head back down the trail. The sun was already setting, the brief winter day fading into purple dusk. We would have to move fast to reach the trailhead before full dark. We had gone maybe half a mile when Dale stopped suddenly, holding up his fist in the signal to halt. I froze, scanning the trees, my rifle coming up instinctively. "Listen," Dale whispered. I listened. At first, I heard nothing but the wind moving through the high branches. Then, faintly, I heard it. A sound like nothing I had ever encountered. It was a cry, but not a human cry. Not an animal cry either. It was something between a scream and a howl, high-pitched and keening, with undertones that seemed to vibrate in my chest cavity. It echoed through the valley, bouncing off the mountain walls, making it impossible to tell where it came from. "What the hell was that?" Grant breathed. The cry came again, closer this time, and now I could hear something else beneath it. Words, distorted, stretched, barely recognizable, but words nonetheless. "Help me. Please help me." A child's voice. Dale's face went even paler. "That is not real," he said. "That is not a real child." "It could be one of the Henderson kids," Grant said, already moving toward the sound. "They could be injured, calling for help." "Wait." Dale grabbed his arm. "You do not understand. My grandfather told me about this. The Wendigo it mimics. It uses the voices of its victims to lure in more prey. That is not a child, it is a trap." The voice came again, weaker now, more pitiful. "Please, I am so cold. Please help me." Every instinct I had screamed at me to run. But another part of me, the part that had spent 15 years rescuing people from these mountains, could not ignore that voice, could not walk away from a child calling for help, even if every rational part of my brain told me it was wrong. "We check it out," I decided, carefully. "Stay close. Watch each other's backs. If anything seems off, we run." Dale wanted to argue. I could see it in his face, but he was too professional to question orders in the field. He nodded grimly and fell into position beside me. Grant took the rear, his rifle sweeping the trees behind us. We followed the voice into a narrow ravine that cut between two steep hillsides. The walls rose on either side, covered in ice and snow, blocking out the last of the fading light. The temperature dropped even further here, so cold that each breath felt like inhaling shards of glass. My fingers were numb despite the gloves. My face ached from the exposure. The voice kept calling, leading us deeper into the ravine. "Help me. I am scared. Please." Then it stopped. We stood in the gathering darkness, listening. Nothing. Just the wind and the creak of frozen branches. "Something's wrong," Dale whispered. "We need to get out of here. Now." I agreed. Whatever had lured us in here, it was not a child. Dale's stories were starting to seem less like folklore and more like a warning I should have heeded. We turned to head back the way we had come, and found our path blocked. It stood at the mouth of the ravine, silhouetted against the last gray light of dusk. Tall, so impossibly tall, at least 8 feet, maybe more, hunched over, as if its spine was bent in ways that human spines should not bend. Its limbs were elongated, arms that reached nearly to the ground, legs that bent backward at the knees like the hind legs of a deer. Its body was emaciated, skin stretched tight over visible ribs and jutting hip bones, so thin it should not have been able to stand. Its skin was pale, almost gray, with patches of what looked like frost forming on its surface, and its head, it was crowned with a rack of antlers, massive and branching, rising from a skull that was too long, too narrow, with sunken eye sockets that glowed with a faint, phosphorescent light. The face was somewhere between human and animal, a lipless mouth that stretched too wide, revealing teeth that were long and yellow and pointed. The smell hit us a moment later, decay and rot and something else, something sweet and sickly, like meat that had been frozen and thawed too many times. "Run!" Dale screamed. We ran. Not back through the ravine, that was blocked, but up the hillside, scrambling through deep snow, clawing at rocks and roots to pull ourselves higher. Behind us, I heard that sound again, that keening howl, but now it was mixed with something else. Laughter, a horrible gibbering laughter that echoed off the ravine walls. I did not look back. I could not look back. I just climbed, my lungs burning, my muscles screaming, adrenaline flooding my system with a terror more primal than anything I had ever experienced. Grant was beside me, moving fast, his face a mask of pure panic. Dale was behind us, older and slower, struggling through the deep snow. I reached back, grabbed his arm, hauled him up a particularly steep section. "Come on," I gasped. "Come on, keep moving." We crested the hill and kept running, crashing through underbrush, dodging between trees. The forest was almost completely dark now, just starlight filtering through the canopy. I pulled out my flashlight, swept it ahead of us, tried to find a path. Behind us the sounds continued, that laughter, that howling cry. And now footsteps, heavy pounding footsteps that seemed to shake the frozen ground. It was following us. It was fast, too fast for something that size. "The trail," Dale shouted, pointing. "There, the main trail." We burst out of the underbrush onto the packed snow of the Elwha Trail. I turned downhill, toward the trailhead, toward the car, toward safety. We ran, all three of us, flat out sprinting despite our heavy packs and the treacherous footing. The footsteps behind us faded. The howling stopped. We kept running anyway, not willing to slow down, not willing to trust that we had escaped. We ran for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes. Finally, when my legs gave out and I could not take another step, I collapsed against a tree, gasping for breath. Dale and Grant fell beside me, all of us heaving, our breath forming clouds in the frozen air. "Is it gone?" Grant managed between gasps. "Did we lose it?" I do not know. I forced myself to stand, to sweep my flashlight through the surrounding trees. Nothing, just darkness and silence, and the cold that seemed to grow more intense with each passing minute. "We need to keep moving," Dale said. "We cannot stay here. If that thing is still out there, it will find us." He was right. We gathered ourselves and started down the trail again, moving at a fast walk now instead of a sprint. My body ached from the exertion, my lungs burned from the cold air, but fear kept me moving. About a mile from the trailhead, Grant suddenly stopped. "Do you hear that?" he asked. I listened. At first, nothing. Then, faintly, I heard voices, human voices calling out in the darkness. "Hello? Search and rescue. Is anyone out there?" Relief flooded through me. Back up. Someone had realized we were overdue and sent a team after us. We were saved. "Over here!" I shouted, waving my flashlight. "We are over here!" Figures emerged from the trees, flashlight beams sweeping toward us. 4 rangers, bundled against the cold, their faces tense with concern. "Creek," the lead ranger said. "A woman named Sarah Martinez. What the hell happened? You missed your check-in by 4 hours. We thought something went wrong." "It did," I said. "Something went very wrong. We found the Henderson camp, destroyed. No survivors. And there is something in these woods, something I cannot explain." Martinez's expression shifted from concern to skepticism. "What kind of something?" I did not know how to answer. "How do you tell your colleagues that you saw a monster? How do you explain a creature that should not exist, that defied everything we thought we knew about the natural world?" Dale saved me the trouble. "Wendigo," he said flatly. "We saw a Wendigo." Martinez stared at him. "Oh, what?" "I know how it sounds." Dale's voice was steady despite everything. "I know it sounds insane. but I know what I saw. 8 feet tall, antlers, moved faster than anything that size should move. It was mimicking voices, using a child's voice to lure us in. Sarah, I have been ranging these mountains for 20 years. I have never seen anything like this. Martinez looked at me. Creek? I nodded slowly. I do not know what it was, but Dale's description matches what I saw. It blocked our path in a ravine, then chased us through the woods. We barely got away. The other rangers exchanged glances. I could see the doubt in their faces, the assumption that we had panicked, misidentified an animal, let our imaginations run wild in the darkness. I could not blame them. If I had not seen it with my own eyes, I would not have believed it either. We need to get back to the station, Martinez said finally. All of you need medical attention, and we need to figure out what actually happened out here. What actually happened is exactly what we told you, Grant said, his voice rising. There is a monster in these woods. It killed the Hendersons, and it almost killed us. Grant. Martinez's voice was sharp. I understand you are upset. We all deal with trauma differently, but right now, I need you to stay calm and follow procedure. We will debrief properly once everyone is safe and warm. Grant wanted to argue. I could see it, but I put a hand on his shoulder. She is right, I said quietly. Let's get out of here first. We can figure out the rest later. We hiked the remaining mile to the trailhead in tense silence. The 4 backup rangers formed a perimeter around us, their flashlights constantly moving, searching the trees. I noticed that despite their skepticism, they had their weapons ready. Maybe they did not believe our story, but they were not taking chances either. The trailhead appeared ahead of us, a small parking lot carved out of the forest. Our vehicles sat where we had left them, covered in a fresh layer of frost. Safety. Finally. We were 50 yards from the cars when it happened. The scream came from directly above us, that same impossible sound, halfway between a human cry and a predator's howl. Everyone froze, flashlight beams snapping upward. It was in the trees, crouched on a massive branch, 40 feet above the ground, looking down at us with those glowing, phosphorescent eyes. In the combined light of half a dozen flashlights, I could see it clearly for the first time. It was worse than I remembered. The body was skeletal, every bone visible through the stretched grayish skin. The arms were too long, jointed in ways that made no anatomical sense, ending in hands with fingers like icicles, sharp and curved. The antlers rose from its skull in a crown of bone, draped with strips of something that might have been moss or might have been flesh. Its mouth hung open, revealing row upon row of teeth that went back into its throat like a shark's. But the worst part, the part that has haunted my nightmares every night since, was the eyes. They were human eyes, human in shape, in expression. And in those eyes, behind the hunger and the madness, I saw intelligence. I saw malice. I saw something that understood exactly what it was doing and took pleasure in our fear. "Open fire!" Martinez screamed. 6 rifles fired simultaneously, the sound shattering the silence of the frozen forest. I saw bullets strike the creature, saw dark fluid splatter from the wounds. It jerked with each impact, its body convulsing, and then it laughed. That same gibbering, horrible laughter I had heard in the ravine. It laughed as the bullets tore into it, laughed as its blood dripped down from the branch, laughed as it dropped from the tree and landed in the snow before us. It moved. I have never seen anything move that fast. One moment it was in front of Martinez, the next it was behind her, those ice-pick fingers driving through her back and out her chest. She did not even have time to scream, just a wet, choking sound as her lungs filled with blood. The creature lifted her off the ground, held her up like a trophy. Its mouth opened impossibly wide, and it bit. Martinez's head disappeared into that gaping maw, the teeth crunching through bone and tissue. Blood sprayed across the white snow, steam rising from the hot liquid in the frozen air. "Run!" I screamed. "Everyone run!" We scattered, rangers running in every direction, flashlight beams cutting wild patterns through the darkness. I heard screams behind me, gunfire, more screaming, the sound of something heavy hitting the ground. I ran for the cars. Keys. I needed my keys. I fumbled in my pocket, found them, hit the unlock button. The headlights flashed, illuminating the parking lot, illuminating Dale. He was on the ground, crawling toward me, leaving a dark trail in the snow. His legs were gone, severed at the thighs, the stumps leaving streaks of red across the white parking lot. His face was pale, his eyes wide with shock. "Logan," he gasped, reaching for me. "Help me, please." I froze. Every instinct told me to grab him, to pull him into the car, to get him out of here. But I knew it was already too late. No one survived injuries like that. No one. And something was behind him, moving through the darkness. Silent now. Patient. "I am sorry," I whispered. "God forgive me. I am sorry." I got in the car, started the engine, and I drove. In the rearview mirror, I saw the creature emerge from the shadows, saw it crouch over Dale's body. I saw it feed, and I kept driving, my foot pressed to the floor, tears streaming down my face, screaming wordlessly into the night. I do not remember much of the drive back to the ranger station. Miles of dark road, trees pressing close on either side, the constant fear that something was going to leap out of the forest and land on my car. I remember gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands ached. I remember the taste of bile in my throat. I remember thinking that I was going to die, that it was following me, that there was nowhere I could run that would be far enough. I made it to the station around midnight, burst through the doors babbling about monsters and death and teammates torn apart. They thought I was crazy. Of course they did. A ranger coming in wild-eyed and blood-spattered, raving about creatures from folklore. They called the medics, tried to calm me down, asked me over and over what had happened. I told them everything, about the Henderson camp, about the creature, about Martinez and Dale and the others. I described it in detail, that skeletal body, those antlers, those horribly human eyes. I described the sounds it made, the way it moved, the way it had mimicked a child's voice to lure us in. They did not believe me, not at first. Then they sent a team to the trailhead. They found Martinez, or what was left of her. Her torso, stripped of flesh, the bones picked clean and gleaming white in their flashlight beams. They found Dale, similarly processed, his body reduced to a skeleton, lying in a pool of frozen blood. They found the other two rangers who had been with Martinez, one decapitated, the other simply gone, nothing left but a spray of blood and a single boot. Grant was never found. The official report called it a bear attack. Multiple bears, they said, driven by unusual aggression due to the harsh winter conditions. The evidence of coordination, of intelligence, of a creature that could mimic human voices and climb trees and move faster than any natural animal was dismissed or ignored. The claw marks on the trees were attributed to bears sharpening their claws. The destruction of the Henderson camp was blamed on scavengers. Nobody wanted to admit what really happened. Nobody wanted to acknowledge that there was something in those mountains that did not fit into any category we understood. I spent 2 weeks in a psychiatric facility under observation for acute stress disorder. They gave me pills that blurred the memories and smoothed out the terror. They told me I had experienced a traumatic event and my mind had filled in the gaps with fantasy. They said the human brain often creates monsters to explain violence that is too senseless to accept. I let them believe that. I took their pills and nodded at their explanations and pretended that I was getting better. Because the alternative, fighting to convince people of something they desperately did not want to believe, seemed even worse than the nightmares. When they released me, I resigned from the Park Service immediately. 15 years of experience, commendations, a career I had loved, and I walked away without a second thought. I could not go back into those forests. Could not spend another night in the shadow of those mountains, knowing what lived there. I moved to the city, as far from the wilderness as I could get. I took a job in an office, surrounded by concrete and glass and the constant hum of human activity. I thought I could leave it behind, thought I could forget. But you cannot forget something like that. You cannot unsee those glowing eyes, unhear that terrible laughter, unfeel the primal terror of being prey. Every night, I dream of the creature. Every time I see footage of the Olympic mountains on television, my heart races and my palms sweat. The memory is always there, lurking beneath the surface of my thoughts, waiting to emerge whenever I let my guard down. 6 months after my resignation, I received an email from an address I did not recognize. The subject line was blank. The body contained only a link to a news article and a single sentence: "You are not alone." The article was about a series of disappearances in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, about 50 miles south of where I had encountered the creature. 3 hikers had vanished over the course of 2 months. Their camps had been found destroyed, blood sprayed across the snow, no tracks leading away. The official explanation was bear attacks, just like ours. But reading between the lines, I saw the same patterns, the same violence, the same inexplicable absence of tracks. I replied to the email. "Who are you? How do you know about me?" The response came within the hour. "My name is not important. What is important is that I have been tracking these incidents for 30 years. What you encountered in the Olympics was not unique. It was one of many, and they are spreading." Over the following months, I exchanged dozens of emails with this anonymous source. They sent me documentation, police reports, coroner's records, eyewitness accounts from survivors who, like me, had been dismissed as crazy or traumatized. The evidence painted a picture that the official narrative refused to acknowledge. Something was killing people in the northern forests, something intelligent, coordinated, and growing bolder. According to my contact, the creatures, they called them Wendigos, using the traditional name from Algonquin folklore, had been documented throughout the Pacific Northwest for centuries. Native American tribes had known about them, had developed rituals and taboos designed to protect their people from the creatures' predation. But as wilderness areas shrank and human development pushed deeper into previously isolated regions, encounters were becoming more frequent. The creatures were territorial, my contact explained. They established hunting grounds and defended them viciously against intruders. When a Wendigo felt threatened, when humans pushed too far into its territory, it responded with overwhelming violence. The attacks I had witnessed, the Henderson family, my fellow rangers, were all part of a territorial dispute. We had unknowingly entered a Wendigo's hunting ground, and it had reacted the way any apex predator would react to perceived competition. But that was not the worst of it. According to my contact, Wendigos were not just animals. They were something far stranger, far more dangerous. The folklore suggested they were humans, once, people who had been transformed by circumstances, usually starvation and cannibalism, into something no longer human. They retained their intelligence, their memories, their ability to speak and reason, but their humanity was replaced by an endless, consuming hunger that could never be satisfied. I thought about the creature's eyes. Those horribly human eyes, filled with intelligence and malice. I thought about the way it had laughed as we shot it, the way it had mimicked a child's voice with perfect clarity, and I felt sick. A year after the Olympics incident, I decided I had to know more. I could not spend the rest of my life hiding in the city, jumping at shadows, dreaming of antlers and teeth. I needed to understand what I had encountered, needed to believe there was some way to fight it, to protect people from it. I started researching, not just the emails from my anonymous contact, but everything I could find. Historical accounts, anthropological studies of indigenous folklore, modern sightings and reports, most dismissed as hoaxes or hysteria. I compiled data, looked for patterns, tried to build a coherent picture of what these creatures were and how they operated. The picture that emerged was terrifying. Wendigos had been documented across the northern United States and Canada for centuries, anywhere winter was harsh enough and food scarce enough to drive people to desperation. The transformation, according to folklore, required specific conditions: extreme isolation, starvation, and ultimately, the consumption of human flesh. Anyone who resorted to cannibalism, even to survive, risked becoming a Wendigo, their body warping and changing as an evil spirit took possession of their soul. Modern accounts were harder to interpret. Most were obvious hoaxes or misidentifications, but some, a troubling number, described encounters that matched what I had experienced. Tall, emaciated figures glimpsed in remote wilderness areas, voices calling from the forest, mimicking loved ones, luring people away from safety, campsites destroyed with extreme violence, bodies never recovered. The connection between these modern sightings and the folklore seemed clear. Whatever mechanism created Wendigos, whatever transformation turned human beings into apex predators of the northern forests, it was still happening. The creatures were not relics of a superstitious past. They were an ongoing threat, hiding in the dwindling wilderness, emerging when humans pushed too far into their territory. I shared my research with my contact. They seemed impressed, told me I was asking the right questions. Then they told me something that changed everything. There is a group, they wrote, researchers, survivors, people who have dedicated their lives to understanding and containing the Wendigo threat. They operate in secret because no official institution will acknowledge the problem. They would like to meet you. I hesitated for a long time before responding. Meeting this group meant committing to something, diving deeper into a reality I desperately wanted to escape. But I thought about the Hendersons, about Martinez and Dale and Grant. I thought about all the hikers who went into the wilderness and never came back, their disappearances written off as accidents or animal attacks. If there was a way to stop it, if there was something I could do to prevent more deaths, did I not owe it to them to try? I agreed to the meeting. It took place in a small cabin in the mountains of eastern Washington, far from any town or road. I drove for hours through winding forest tracks, following GPS coordinates that led me deeper and deeper into country that looked altogether too familiar. My heart raced the entire way, every shadow in the trees making me flinch, every sound from the forest making me reach for the rifle I had brought along. The cabin was rustic, wood-paneled and heated by a massive stone fireplace. 4 people were waiting for me inside. My anonymous contact, who introduced themselves as Alex, was a middle-aged woman with steel-gray hair and the haunted eyes of someone who had seen too much. The others were a young man named Jason, who claimed to have survived a Wendigo attack in Minnesota, an elderly Native American woman named Helen, who identified herself as a keeper of traditional knowledge, and a grizzled former FBI agent named Carter, who had apparently investigated a series of unexplained deaths in the national forest during the 90s. We talked for hours. Each of them shared their story, their encounter, their research. The details varied, but the core elements were always the same. The impossible speed, the mimicked voices, the violence, and the hunger. We compared notes, identified patterns, tried to build a comprehensive understanding of the Wendigo phenomenon. Helen proved to be the most valuable source. Her grandmother had been a medicine woman among the Ojibwe people, trained in the traditional rituals for dealing with Wendigos. The creatures, according to her tradition, were not simply monsters. They were humans who had lost their way, whose hunger had overwhelmed their humanity until nothing remained but appetite and rage. The transformation was not inevitable, Helen explained. Even someone who committed cannibalism could resist the change, could fight against the spirit trying to possess them. But once the transformation was complete, once the human became fully Wendigo, there was no going back. The person they had been was gone, replaced by something that wore their face but had no connection to their former self. How do you kill one? I asked. I shot the one I encountered, multiple times. It did not seem to care. Fire, Helen said simply. The only thing that kills a Wendigo is fire. You have to burn it completely until nothing remains. Even a single bone can allow the spirit to regenerate. I thought about the creature standing in the trees, bullets tearing through its flesh without slowing it down. I thought about how fast it moved, how it seemed to anticipate our actions. Getting close enough to burn it would be nearly impossible, but not entirely impossible. We spent the following months planning. Carter had contacts in the FBI and the Park Service who were willing to provide information off the record. Jason had technical skills, expertise with cameras and tracking equipment that could help us locate a Wendigo. Alex coordinated, gathered resources, kept our group organized and focused. And I provided field experience, knowledge of the wilderness and how to survive in it. Our goal was not to exterminate the Wendigos. Helen was clear that such a thing was probably impossible and perhaps unethical. These were creatures born of human suffering, transformed by circumstances beyond their control. They deserved some measure of compassion, even if that compassion was expressed by leaving them alone in their wilderness sanctuaries. But we could establish boundaries, could identify territories and warn people away from them, could train rangers and search and rescue teams to recognize the signs and avoid confrontation, could develop protocols that would minimize encounters and save lives. Over the next 2 years, we mapped Wendigo territories throughout the Pacific Northwest. We documented at least 7 distinct individuals, each occupying a range of roughly 100 square miles. We learned their patterns, their behaviors, the subtle signs that indicated their presence, and we developed procedures for staying safe in their territory. The most important rule was simple: do not threaten them. Wendigos were aggressive when challenged, when humans entered areas they considered sacred or important. But they were also intelligent, capable of assessing threats and choosing when to engage. If you encountered a Wendigo and did not threaten it, did not try to fight or chase it, there was a chance it would let you leave. A chance, not a guarantee, but better than nothing. We shared our findings with select individuals, rangers and outdoorsmen who were open-minded enough to listen. Some believed us, most did not. But a few, enough to matter, started implementing our recommendations, staying away from certain areas, watching for the signs, never venturing alone into the deep wilderness. The disappearances did not stop entirely. They never would, but they decreased. Fewer hikers vanishing without a trace, fewer camps found destroyed with no explanation. It was not a solution, but it was progress. 3 years after the Olympics incident, I returned to Olympic National Forest. I did not go alone. Jason came with me, along with a former Marine named Rodriguez, who had joined our group after his brother disappeared in the Cascades. We carried firearms, but also flares and incendiary devices, supplies for a week in the wilderness, and the knowledge we had accumulated over years of research. Our goal was to confirm that the Wendigo I had encountered was still occupying the Elwha Valley. If it was, we would map its territory, identify its patterns, and add it to our database. If it had moved on, we needed to know that too. The forest was different than I remembered. Or maybe I was different. The silence no longer felt oppressive. The shadows no longer seemed threatening. I had learned to read the wilderness, to understand its moods, to recognize when something was wrong. This time, I was not prey. I was a researcher, studying a dangerous phenomenon with the respect it deserved. We hiked to the Henderson campsite, now just a clearing in the forest with no sign of what had happened there. The tents and equipment had been removed, the blood absorbed into the soil. Only the claw marks on the surrounding trees remained, faded now but still visible if you knew where to look. From there, we moved carefully into what our research suggested was the Wendigo's core territory. We set up cameras, placed motion sensors, established a base camp that could be defended if necessary. Then we waited. On the third night, it found us. I heard it first. That sound. That keening howl that had haunted my nightmares for years. It echoed through the valley, announcing its presence, warning us that we had been noticed. I felt my heart rate spike, felt the old terror trying to take control, but I had prepared for this. I knew what to do. We gathered by the fire, weapons ready, and waited. The sounds grew closer. Footsteps in the snow, branches breaking, and then, at the edge of the firelight, a figure appeared. It was the same creature. I recognized it instantly, even though years had passed. The same skeletal frame, the same massive antlers, the same glowing eyes. It stood at the boundary of our campsite, watching us with that terrible, knowing intelligence. "We do not want to fight," I said, keeping my voice calm and level. "We are not here to threaten you. We just want to understand." The creature tilted its head, studying me. Then, impossibly, it spoke. "You came back." The voice was wrong, distorted, as if the words were being formed by a throat not designed for human speech. But the words were clear. "I remember you. You ran. The others did not run fast enough." My companions shifted nervously beside me, but they held their positions. We had discussed this possibility, prepared for it. Communication was rare, but not unheard of. Some Wendigos retained enough of their former selves to speak, to reason, to negotiate. "I came back to learn," I said, "to understand what you are, to find a way for your kind and mine to coexist." The creature made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Coexist. You do not know what that word means. You cut down the forests, you drive away the prey, you push and push until there is nowhere left to go, and then you wonder why we kill you." "I know." I swallowed hard. "I know we have done wrong, but some of us want to make it right. We want to protect these places, protect you." The Wendigo was silent for a long moment. Those glowing eyes studied me, searched me as if looking for deception. Then it stepped forward, into the firelight. Up close, it was even more horrifying. The skin was translucent in places, revealing the muscle and bone beneath. The antlers were covered in strange growths, fungi or perhaps something else entirely. The smell was overwhelming, decay and frost and something ancient and terrible. "I was a man once," it said, "a ranger like you. I came into these mountains in the winter of 1937. My partner fell, broke his leg. We were trapped for weeks. When the food ran out, I did what I had to do to survive." "Dear God," I whispered, "there is no God in these mountains. Only hunger, only the cold." I tried to leave after, tried to go back to my life. But the spirit had already taken me. I changed. became this. And now I cannot leave, cannot die, cannot be anything other than what I am. I did not know what to say. What could you say to something like that? To a creature trapped in an endless existence of hunger and isolation, a human being transformed into a monster by circumstances beyond their control? I am sorry, I managed. I am sorry for what happened to you. The Wendigo made that laughing sound again. Sorrow is useless. Understanding is what matters. You came here for understanding, so I will give it to you. We do not hunt for pleasure. We hunt because we must. The hunger never stops, never eases. But we can control it sometimes. We can choose to let prey escape if they do not threaten us. So we can coexist, I said. If we respect your territory, stay out of the places that matter to you. Perhaps. The creature's eyes flicked to my companions, assessing them. Perhaps not. Humans are unpredictable. They promise peace and bring war. They promise protection and bring destruction. I have been alive for almost a century. I have seen what your kind does to things it does not understand. I understand, I said. Better than most. I have seen what you can do. What you did to my friends, to the people I worked with. I know how dangerous you are. But I also know that hunting you, trying to exterminate you, would only make things worse. So I am asking for a chance to prove that some of us can learn. The Wendigo studied me for a long moment. Then it stepped back, retreating toward the shadows. Stay out of the high valleys, it said. Stay away from the burial grounds. If your people honor those boundaries, we will not hunt them. But if anyone comes with weapons, with traps, with the intent to kill, we will respond as we always have. It paused at the edge of the darkness, looking back. You have 1 year to prove your kind can be trusted. 1 year without incident. If you fail, if anyone violates our territory, the agreement is void. Then it was gone, vanished into the forest as silently as it had arrived. I stood by the fire for a long time after, shaking, partly from fear, partly from the cold, but mostly from the weight of what had just happened. I had spoken to a Wendigo, had negotiated with it, had possibly, just possibly, taken the first step towards something that could save lives. We spent the rest of the week mapping the territory, identifying the high valleys and burial grounds the creature had mentioned. When we returned to civilization, we shared our findings with the network, established protocols, started the work of protecting both humans and the creatures that shared their wilderness. That was 5 years ago. The agreement has held. Not perfectly, of course. There have been incidents, close calls, moments when everything nearly fell apart. But overall, the disappearances in the Elwha Valley have stopped. Rangers know where not to go. Hikers stay on marked trails. And somewhere in those endless mountains, a creature that was once a man continues its eternal existence, neither hunting nor hunted. I do not know if this counts as a happy ending. The Wendigos are still out there. The threat has not disappeared. People still die in the wilderness, some to these creatures, some to simpler dangers. The work is never finished, but I have found a purpose, a way to use what I experienced, what I learned, to make a difference. I train rangers now, teach them to recognize the signs, to respect the boundaries, to understand that the wilderness is not empty. There are things in those forests older than humanity, more dangerous than any bear or cougar, and we share this world with them, whether we acknowledge it or not. Sometimes, late at night, I still dream of the Olympics, of that night in the ravine when I first saw those glowing eyes, of Dale and Martinez and the others who did not make it out. The guilt never fully goes away, neither does the fear. But alongside the guilt and fear, there is something else now. Understanding. Purpose. The knowledge that I survived for a reason, that I was meant to carry this story forward, to warn and teach and protect. This is that story. I have told it as truthfully as I can. Not because I expect everyone to believe it, but because someone needs to know. Someone needs to understand what is out there, waiting in the dark places of the world. And someone needs to be prepared. The next time you are in the wilderness, far from the roads and the towns and the safety of civilization, remember what I have told you. Watch for the signs. Respect the boundaries. And if you hear a voice calling from the forest, a voice that sounds like someone you know, begging for help, do not follow it. Turn around. Walk away. Because some places are not meant for humans. Some territories belong to older things, hungrier things, and they do not take kindly to intruders. The wilderness keeps its secrets, but this secret about the creatures in the mountains, the things that were once men, the hunger that never ends, this secret needs to be told. Consider yourself warned, and may you never have cause to learn the truth of these words firsthand. I have supervised dozens of rescue missions since then, some successful, some not. But only one was called off without explanation. Only one ended with me standing at a trailhead in the middle of the night, staring into the darkness, knowing exactly what was looking back. The official reason was weather, but the sky that night was clearer than I have ever seen it. And somewhere in that clarity, beneath a canopy of stars older than memory, something was watching. Something was waiting. Something is always waiting. Remember that when you walk beneath the ancient trees. Remember that you are never truly alone. The forest remembers too. I am Logan Creek. This is my testimony. And if you are reading this, if you have made it to the end of my account, then you are one of the ones who will carry this knowledge forward. Use it wisely. Use it carefully. And whatever you do, stay out of the Elwha Valley when the winter comes. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. I opened mine on a Tuesday night in late November when the cold was hungry and the silence pressed down like a weight. I have been trying to close it ever since. May you have better luck than I did. The end. Some things you learn too late. Like the fact that Olympic National Forest holds secrets older than any map can show, or that certain trails should never be walked alone after dark, or that when you hear your name whispered from deep within the trees, you should never, ever answer back. My name is Morgan Reeves, and I learned all of this the hard way during 3 days in October that changed everything I thought I knew about fear. I had been a ranger at Olympic National Forest for 8 months when Quinn Ashford went missing. 8 months of routine patrols, helping lost hikers, and filing reports that all said the same thing. Human error, poor preparation, simple accidents. I thought I understood the forest, thought I knew its dangers. Black bears, cougars, steep ravines hidden beneath layers of moss and fern. The natural hazards that could kill you if you were careless or unlucky. But I had no idea that some dangers wear a human face and hunt with methodical patience. The morning of October 23rd started cold and gray, the kind of dawn where fog clings to the Douglas firs like something alive. I was stationed at the Graves Creek entrance, sipping coffee that had gone lukewarm in my thermos, when my radio crackled with dispatch calling all available units. Missing hiker, female, 26 years old, named Quinn Ashford, last seen 3 days ago on the Enchanted Valley Trail. 3 days, in October. With temperatures dropping below freezing at night and rain forecast for the next 48 hours, 3 days might as well have been 3 weeks. I grabbed my pack and headed for the command post, my mind already running through search protocols. Grid patterns, probability zones, last known position, all the training I had absorbed but never truly needed until now. Ranger Supervisor Brooke Hendricks was coordinating the search when I arrived, her weathered hands marking locations on a topographic map with swift, practiced movements. Brooke had 20 years with the Forest Service, and her eyes held the kind of hard-earned knowledge that comes from seeing both the best and worst of what these mountains could do to people. Ashford was experienced, Brooke said without looking up. Solo backpacker, done this route twice before. She filed a trip plan, brought proper gear. This one does not fit the usual pattern. What pattern? I asked, moving closer to study the map. Brooke finally met my gaze, and something in her expression made my skin crawl. We have had 4 disappearances in this sector over the past 2 years. All experienced hikers. All filed proper plans. All vanished without significant trace. 4 disappearances. I had been briefed on missing person statistics during training, but 4 in one sector seemed excessive. What did the investigations find? Brooke hesitated. And in that pause, I sensed something she was not saying. Inconclusive. Some gear recovered, but no bodies. The prevailing theory was exposure, falls, animal predation. But you do not think so, I said, reading the doubt in her face. I think something is wrong in the Enchanted Valley sector, and I think Quinn Ashford walked right into it. She assigned me to work with Travis Keller, a ranger with 12 years of experience, who knew the Enchanted Valley better than anyone. Travis was waiting at the trailhead when I arrived, a tall man with a lean, weathered build and eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. He acknowledged me with a brief nod as I approached, already checking his gear with mechanical efficiency. "You worked missing persons before?" he asked, not looking up from his pack. "This is my first," I admitted. Travis paused, something unreadable crossing his face. "Then let me give you the most important piece of advice you will ever get. When something feels wrong out here, when your instincts scream danger, you listen. You do not question it. You do not rationalize it away. You listen and you act. Understood?" "Understood," I said, though I did not fully grasp what he meant. Not yet. We started up the Enchanted Valley Trail, moving through cathedral groves of ancient trees that blocked out most of the pale morning light. The forest here was different from the areas I usually patrolled. Darker, more oppressive. Moss hung from branches like rotting curtains, and the air smelled of decay and earth and something else I could not quite identify. Sound behaved strangely here too. Our footsteps seemed to vanish into nothing, absorbed by the dense vegetation, while distant noises echoed with unnatural clarity. Travis moved with the careful efficiency of someone who had done this many times before, his eyes constantly scanning the forest floor for signs of passage. We were following Quinn's documented route, looking for any indication she had deviated from her plan. Every few hundred yards, Travis would stop and call out her name, his voice swallowed almost immediately by the forest. Only silence answered. 2 miles in, we found the first marker. An energy bar wrapper caught on a branch about 4 feet off the ground, too high to have fallen naturally. Travis examined it with gloved hands, turning it over slowly. "This is fresh," he said quietly. "No weathering. No dirt. If this has been here 3 days, it should show more exposure. Someone placed this recently," I said, understanding dawning. Travis met my eyes, and I saw confirmation there, along with something else. Fear. This is not the first time I have found markers like this. Staged evidence, placed to lead searchers in specific directions. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that Quinn Ashford might not be lost. She might be taken." The implications hit me like cold water. "You think someone is hunting hikers out here?" "I think something is very wrong in this forest, and I think we need to be extremely careful about what we assume and where we go." We continued deeper into the valley, following what might have been Quinn's trail or might have been carefully placed breadcrumbs designed to lead us somewhere specific. The fog grew thicker as we gained elevation, reducing visibility to 30 or 40 feet. Trees loomed out of the white like sentinels, and more than once I found myself glancing over my shoulder at shadows that seemed to move when I was not looking directly at them. Travis found the second marker near a junction where the main trail split toward the old shelter ruins, a torn piece of fabric, blue nylon, that matched the description of Quinn's jacket, hanging from a low branch right at eye level. "Too obvious," Travis muttered. "Too easy. What do? We call it in and wait for backup." He reached for his radio, but when he keyed the mic, only static answered. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Keller. Do you copy?" More static. He adjusted the frequency and tried again. Nothing. "Radio failure?" I asked, though something in my gut told me it was not that simple. Maybe. Or maybe someone is jamming the signal. Travis scanned the forest around us, his hand resting on the bear spray at his belt. "We should head back, regroup at the trailhead where we can get a clear signal." "Agreed," I said, already turning back the way we had come. But as we started down the trail, Travis stopped suddenly, his hand shooting out to grab my arm. "Listen," he whispered. I froze, straining to hear what had alarmed him. At first, there was only the usual forest sounds, wind through branches, distant bird calls, the soft drip of condensation from leaves. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Not ahead of us on the trail, but paralleling our position about 50 yards to the east. Moving when we moved, stopping when we stopped. "Someone is tracking us," I breathed. Travis nodded slowly, his jaw tight. "Stay close to me and do not run." Running triggers predator response. We walk at a steady pace back to the trailhead, and we stay alert. We started moving again, maintaining a measured pace, even though every instinct screamed to sprint for safety. The footsteps kept pace with us, always just out of sight in the fog. Whoever was out there was good, skilled at moving through dense forest without making excessive noise. Once, through a gap in the trees, I caught a glimpse of movement. A dark shape, roughly human-sized, flowing between the trunks like smoke. Then it was gone, and I could not be sure I had seen anything at all. We were still a mile from the trailhead when the trail opened into a small clearing, and that is where we found her. Quinn Ashford, or what I initially thought was Quinn Ashford, sitting propped against a massive cedar tree. Even from 50 feet away, I could see something was wrong with the scene. She was too still, positioned too perfectly, visible from too many angles. "This is wrong," Travis said, grabbing my shoulder before I could move forward. "Look at the setup. She has been placed there, displayed. But what if she needs help?" Then we approach very carefully, and we watch for an ambush. Travis unslung his pack and pulled out a pair of binoculars, scanning the clearing and the surrounding forest. "I am seeing tripwires, at least 3 of them. Whoever set this up wanted to know when someone got close. We need to leave now and come back with backup." But before we could retreat, a voice called out from somewhere in the fog, echoing strangely so I could not pinpoint its origin. "She is alive," the voice said. Male, calm, almost pleasant, but she will not be for much longer without help. "Clock is ticking. Rangers, better make your choice." Travis keyed his radio again, trying desperately to raise dispatch. Still nothing but static. The voice laughed, a sound that made my blood run cold. "Radios will not work in my domain. I have made sure of that. You are isolated now. Just you, me, and the dying girl. Time to see what you are really made of." "Who are you?" Travis shouted into the forest. "What do you want?" "I am someone who knows these woods better than you ever will. Someone who understands that the only real law out here is survival of the fittest. And what I want is simple. To see if you are predator or prey." The figure of Quinn slumped further against the tree, and I heard a weak moan carry across the clearing. She was alive, and truly in distress. "This is insane," I shouted. "Let her go and we can talk about whatever you want." "Talk?" The voice seemed amused. "I am well past talking, but I will make you a deal. One of you can try to save the girl while the other deals with me. Choose quickly, Rangers. She does not have much time." Travis was already moving, pulling me back toward the tree line. "This is a trap. Classic predator behavior. Separate the group, isolate the individuals, attack when they are vulnerable. We leave together and bring back a tactical team. We cannot leave her to die. We cannot help her if we are dead." Travis's voice was hard, but I could hear the strain beneath it. He knew we were in an impossible situation, and he knew that any choice we made could be fatal. But Quinn moaned again, a sound of pure agony that cut through my training and reached something primal inside me. "I am going to get her," I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. "You get back to the trailhead and bring help. Morgan, do not do this. Someone has to. And you are right about the tactical team. We need backup, but that girl needs help now." I started toward the clearing before Travis could stop me, my service weapon drawn and my senses hyper-alert for any sign of attack. Behind me, I heard Travis curse and then begin moving back down the trail. I was on my own now, facing an unknown threat in hostile territory with limited support and failing equipment. The clearing was about 40 yards across, dominated by the massive cedar where Quinn was positioned. I could see the tripwires Travis had mentioned, thin lines stretching between trees at shin height. Whoever had set this up was experienced, knowledgeable about how searchers would approach a victim. I had to assume there were other traps I could not see. Pressure plates or snares or worse. I moved in a wide arc, trying to approach from an unexpected angle, my weapon sweeping the tree line for any sign of the man who had spoken. "Quinn," I called out softly. "Can you hear me? Can you tell me what happened?" Her head lifted slightly, and I saw her face clearly for the first time. She had been beaten, her left eye swollen shut and blood crusting around her nose and mouth. When she tried to speak, only a croak came out. I was maybe 20 yards away when I saw it, another wire, this one at chest height, nearly invisible against the backdrop of forest. I froze, following the wire with my eyes to see where it led. It disappeared into a pile of deadfall to my right, and I could just make out the shape of something mechanical hidden in the branches, some kind of trap or alarm system. "You are observant," the voice said, much closer now. "That is good. Prey that pays attention lives longer." I spun toward the sound, weapon raised, but saw nothing except fog and trees. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Show yourself," I demanded, hating the tremor in my voice. "Why? So you can shoot me? I do not think so. But I will give you a hint. I am closer than you think, and I have been watching you since you entered my forest. Not your forest. Federal land, protected territory, words on paper. Out here, possession is the only law that matters, and I possess this valley completely. A branch snapped somewhere behind Quinn, and I saw movement in the fog. A shape, definitely human, moving between the trees with predatory grace. He was circling, trying to get behind me while keeping Quinn between us. I adjusted my position, trying to keep both the shape and Quinn in my line of sight. Let her go and face me directly, I said. Is that not what you want? A fair contest between predator and prey? There is nothing fair about nature, the voice replied. The lion does not give the gazelle a fair chance. The wolf does not fight honorably with the deer. Survival is about using every advantage, every trick, every ounce of knowledge to stay alive. And you have already lost this contest. Before I could react, something hit the back of my knee and my leg buckled. I went down hard, my weapon flying from my grip as I hit the ground. Through the pain and disorientation, I realized I had triggered some kind of spring-loaded trap hidden beneath the leaves. A heavy branch, probably, rigged to swing from the trees and strike anyone who approached from this angle. The impact had not broken anything, but my leg was numb and useless. I tried to scramble for my weapon, but a boot came down on my wrist, pinning my hand to the forest floor. Welcome to the bottom of the food chain, the voice said, and I looked up into the face of my attacker for the first time. He was maybe 45, with weathered features and the kind of lean, muscular build that came from years of hard living outdoors. His eyes were what terrified me most, pale blue and utterly calm, showing no emotion except perhaps mild curiosity as he looked down at me. I knew those eyes. I had seen them in the personnel files back at the station. This was Marcus Pike, a former ranger who had been dismissed from the Forest Service 8 years ago for excessive force and behavioral issues. Pike, I gasped. Marcus Pike. Good memory. Though I prefer to think of my old name as belonging to someone else. Someone weak who let bureaucracy and politics dictate how he interacted with the natural world. Out here, I am simply the apex predator. He pressed down harder on my wrist until I felt bones grinding together. You are going to die in this forest, just like the others. But first, you are going to understand what true fear feels like. What did you do to Quinn? Practice. She was supposed to last longer, but she tried to fight back. Broke my nose, actually. He touched his face where I could now see discoloration and swelling. I respect that, but it just meant I had to be more aggressive with the conditioning. Let her go. She is not part of this. Everyone who enters my domain is part of this. They are all resources, food for the ecosystem, or entertainment for me. He leaned down closer, his breath hot against my face. Your partner got away, which means I am on a timeline now. So here is what is going to happen. I am going to let you up, give you a running start, and then I am going to hunt you through these woods until I catch you. If you somehow manage to evade me until dark, I will let Quinn go. If I catch you, well, she dies slowly while you watch. What if I refuse to play your game? Then I kill her right now, and then I take my time with you. There is always a choice, Ranger. The question is which one allows the most people to survive. He stepped back, releasing my wrist, and I scrambled away from him, testing my injured leg. The numbness was fading, replaced by a throbbing ache, but I could put weight on it. Pike retrieved my weapon from where it had fallen and examined it with professional interest before tucking it into his belt. You have a 10-minute head start. I suggest you use it wisely, because once I start tracking you, I do not stop until the prey is down. I looked at Quinn, seeing the desperate plea in her visible eye. Pike followed my gaze and smiled. Do not worry about her. She is secured and will not bleed out for a few hours yet. Your concern should be for yourself and how long you can stay alive. The clock is ticking. I had to make a choice, and I had to make it fast. Stay and try to fight Pike with no weapon and an injured leg, almost certainly resulting in both Quinn and me dying. Or run, buying time for Travis to return with backup while hoping Pike kept his word about Quinn. Neither option was good, but one at least offered a chance. I ran. My leg screamed protest with every step, but adrenaline overrode the pain. Behind me, I heard Pike laughing, a sound that chased me into the fog like something physical. The forest became a blur of green and gray as I crashed through undergrowth, leaped over fallen logs, and tried desperately to put distance between myself and the clearing. But even as I ran, part of my mind was analyzing, planning, looking for any advantage I could exploit. Pike was older and probably not as fast, but he knew these woods intimately and had prepared the terrain like a battlefield. I was younger but injured, unfamiliar with this sector, and completely isolated from backup. After what might have been 5 minutes or 15, I could no longer tell. I stopped in a dense thicket of salal and vine maple, trying to control my breathing and listen for pursuit. The forest was eerily quiet. No birds, no wind, just the pounding of blood in my ears and my own ragged gasps. Then I heard it, footsteps, slow and methodical, moving through the undergrowth with practiced ease. Pike was tracking me, and he was in no hurry because he knew I had nowhere to go. "You are making this too easy," his voice called out, maybe 100 yards behind me. Following the stream was predictable. Leaving obvious tracks was predictable. "You are thinking like a trained ranger, which means you are thinking exactly how I taught rangers to think." I felt a chill run through me. He had trained rangers. He knew every protocol, every technique, every bit of woodcraft they taught at the academy. He could anticipate my moves because he had literally written the training manual I had studied. I needed to do something unexpected, something that went against my training. I left the stream and headed uphill toward a rocky outcrop I had noticed on the map earlier. The climb was brutal, especially with my injured leg, but exposed rocky terrain was harder to track through than soft forest floor. If I could reach higher ground, I might be able to see Pike coming and plan accordingly. The rocks were slick with moss and moisture, and more than once I nearly lost my footing and plunged down the slope, but I kept climbing, driven by the knowledge that stopping meant death. I reached a narrow ledge about 200 feet above the valley floor and collapsed against the rock face, gasping for air. From this vantage point, I could see back down through gaps in the fog to the forest below. For a moment, I saw nothing, and I dared to hope I had lost him. Then a figure emerged from the tree line, moving with unhurried confidence toward the base of the outcrop. Pike had followed me easily, and now he was starting to climb. I looked around desperately for options. The ledge continued for maybe 30 feet before ending at a sheer drop. Behind me was solid rock. There was nowhere to go except up, and the cliff face above was nearly vertical. "You have good instincts," Pike called up, his voice echoing off the rocks. "High ground is tactically sound. But you have also cornered yourself, which is a rookie mistake. I need to teach you that tactics without strategy is just delayed defeat." I grabbed a loose rock about the size of a softball and waited until Pike was about 50 feet below me, then hurled it down with all my strength. He saw it coming and dodged easily, the rock clattering harmlessly past him down the slope. "Nice try, but I have been dodging rocks longer than you have been alive. Try again if it makes you feel better." I picked up another rock, but this time I did not throw it at Pike. Instead, I aimed for a loose section of scree about 20 feet to his right. The impact triggered a small avalanche, sending rocks and gravel cascading down the slope. Pike had to scramble to avoid being swept off the cliff, and in his haste, he lost his grip and slid several feet before catching himself. "Now you are learning," he said, but I detected a note of genuine approval in his voice. "Use the terrain, make the environment your weapon, but you are still thinking too small." I wedged myself into a crack in the rock face and tried to think. What did I have that Pike did not expect? What advantage could I possibly leverage against someone with superior experience, superior knowledge of the terrain, and complete willingness to kill? Then it hit me. My GPS unit. Pike had jammed the radios, but GPS was satellite-based, passive reception only. It could not be blocked without sophisticated equipment. And more importantly, Travis would have given my last known position to dispatch before his radio died. If search and rescue was mobilizing, they would be tracking my GPS transponder. All I had to do was survive until they arrived, and to do that, I needed to stop running and start thinking like a predator myself. Pike was nearly to the ledge now, climbing with the ease of someone who had made this ascent many times before. I pressed myself back into the crack, making myself as invisible as possible, and waited. When his hand appeared over the edge of the ledge, reaching for a handhold, I brought my boot down on his fingers as hard as I could. Pike roared in pain and shock, his grip failing. For one beautiful moment, I thought he would fall, but he caught himself with his other hand and hauled himself up onto the ledge with terrifying speed. "You broke my fingers," he snarled, and for the first time I saw genuine anger in his eyes instead of cold calculation. Good, that means you are finally fighting back. He came at me then, no longer playing cat and mouse but attacking with brutal efficiency. I tried to dodge, but the ledge was too narrow. His fist caught me in the ribs, driving the air from my lungs, and then we were grappling on the rocks, both of us trying to gain leverage while avoiding the drop just feet away. Pike was stronger, but I was desperate, and desperation gives you a kind of reckless strength that training cannot replicate. I got my fingers into his broken hand and squeezed. He screamed and shoved me hard, sending me skidding toward the edge. My fingers scrabbled for purchase on the slick rock, finding a crack just as my legs went over the drop. I hung there for a moment, suspended over 200 feet of empty air before Pike grabbed my jacket and hauled me back up. But instead of finishing me off, he held me there, suspended between safety and death. You know what the real tragedy is? He said conversationally, as if we were not both bleeding and broken on a cliff ledge. Even if you kill me, even if you somehow survive this and get rescued, you will never be the same. You will see predators everywhere. Trust nothing. The forest will be ruined for you forever. Maybe, I gasped, but at least I will be alive. He smiled at that, a genuine expression of something almost like respect. Maybe you will. Let us find out. He released my jacket and I scrambled away from the edge, putting the rock crack between us. We stared at each other across maybe 6 feet of stone, both of us exhausted, both of us hurt, waiting to see who would make the next move. That is when I heard it. The distant thrum of helicopter rotors cutting through the fog. Search and rescue was close, probably homing in on my GPS signal. Pike heard it too, and his expression shifted from predatory focus to cold calculation. Time is up, he said. Your reinforcements are coming, but that just means I need to finish this quickly. He came at me again, but this time I was ready. I had found a sharp piece of granite among the rocks, not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. As Pike lunged, I slashed at his face, opening a deep cut across his cheek. He recoiled, more from surprise than pain, and I used the moment to dart past him along the ledge. The helicopter was getting closer, the sound echoing off the rocks. If I could just hold out a few more minutes, if I could just survive long enough for rescue to arrive, then Quinn would have a chance. Then Pike would be stopped. Then all the hikers who had disappeared in this valley would get justice. I reached the end of the ledge where it met the cliff face and realized I was trapped. No way up, no way down except through Pike. He approached slowly now, limping slightly, blood streaming from his cheek and his broken fingers held against his chest. You fought well, he said. Better than most. Under different circumstances, I might have enjoyed having you as an apprentice. But there is only room for one apex predator in this valley, and that position is already filled. The helicopter appeared through the fog below us, a bright yellow search and rescue bird with Olympic National Forest markings. I waved frantically, knowing they probably could not see me through the fog and trees, but hoping the movement would catch their attention. Pike glanced at the helicopter, then back at me, making his calculation. If I kill you now, they will catch me. If I let you live, you will testify against me. Either way, my time in this valley is over. He seemed almost sad about that. Do you know what the real tragedy is? This place was perfect, isolated, plenty of prey, endless terrain to work with. I could have hunted here for decades, and you ruined it in 3 days. I did not ruin anything. You ruined it yourself when you decided other people were just resources for your entertainment. Philosophy is for people with time to debate. We are well past that point. He took another step toward me, and I knew he had made his choice. He was going to kill me and then disappear into the forest before the helicopter could land and deploy its team. He was going to escape, and Quinn was going to die alone in the clearing, and all the other victims would remain missing and unmourned. Unless I stopped him. The granite shard was still in my hand, small but sharp. Pike was injured, exhausted, making mistakes he would not normally make. I had one chance, and I had to take it. As he reached for me, I drove the stone shard upward, aiming for the soft spot beneath his ribs. It was not a killing blow. I did not have the strength or the angle for that, but it was enough to stop him. Pike staggered back, looking down at the shard protruding from his abdomen with an expression of genuine surprise. "You actually stabbed me," he said, almost wonderingly. "You actually chose to fight instead of flee. I chose to survive, and I chose to stop you from hurting anyone else." The helicopter was hovering almost level with our position now, and I could see faces at the open door, rescue personnel trying to assess the situation. Pike looked at them, then at me, then at the forest below. I could see him calculating odds, considering his options. Then, before I could stop him, he stepped backward off the ledge. I lunged forward, grabbing for him on pure instinct, but he was already falling. I watched him plummet through the fog, his body tumbling limply until the trees swallowed him from view. For a moment, I just stood there, unable to process what had happened. Then hands were grabbing me, pulling me back from the edge, voices shouting questions I could not answer. Someone wrapped a thermal blanket around my shoulders. Someone else was checking my injuries, the professional competence of search and rescue washing over me like a wave. "Quinn!" I managed to gasp out. "Quinn Ashford. She is in the clearing below, tied to a cedar tree. She is hurt badly and needs immediate medical attention." The team leader nodded and spoke into his radio, coordinating with ground units. "We are going to get you to safety," he said. "Can you hold on for a lift to the helicopter?" I nodded, too exhausted to speak. They secured me in a harness and winched me up to the hovering aircraft, every movement sending fresh pain through my battered body. Once inside, a paramedic began treating my injuries while the pilot maneuvered toward the clearing where Quinn waited. I could see figures on the ground now, rangers and emergency personnel flooding into the valley. Travis must have made it out and brought back every available unit. We found Quinn exactly where Pike had left her, barely conscious but alive. The paramedics worked with efficient urgency, stabilizing her for transport while I watched from the helicopter. She was going to make it. Against all odds, against Pike's plans, she was going to survive. As for Marcus Pike, they found his body 2 days later, half a mile downstream from where he had fallen. The impact had killed him instantly, they said, though I suspected he had been dead before he hit the ground. Dead from blood loss, from shock, from the certain knowledge that his perfect hunting ground was finished and his reign as apex predator was over. The investigation that followed was extensive and disturbing. Searchers found evidence of at least 7 other victims in the valley, though they only recovered remains from 4. Pike had been hunting hikers for years, perfecting his techniques, building an elaborate network of traps and safe houses throughout the sector. The old ranger station where he had kept Quinn was filled with journals documenting his kills in clinical detail, describing his victims like specimens in some horrific study. I spent 3 weeks recovering from my injuries, 2 fractured ribs, severe bruising, ligament damage in my knee, and a concussion I did not even know I had until the hospital scans. But the physical wounds healed. The psychological ones took longer. I kept seeing Pike falling through the fog, kept hearing his voice echoing through the forest, kept feeling his boot on my wrist and his hands around my throat. The nightmares came every night for months, and even now, years later, they still visit occasionally. Brooke Hendricks retired shortly after the Pike investigation concluded. She told me privately that she had suspected something was wrong in the Enchanted Valley for years, but she had never been able to prove it, never been able to connect the disappearances to anything more sinister than bad luck and harsh wilderness. The guilt of not pushing harder, not investigating deeper, ate at her until she could not continue. I understood that. Some guilt you carry forever. Travis Keller was the one who probably saved my life by getting out and bringing back search and rescue. He never said much about that day, but I noticed he stopped patrolling the Enchanted Valley sector. Some places hold too many bad memories, and even rangers need to protect their mental health. Quinn Ashford recovered physically, though she still walks with a slight limp from the nerve damage Pike inflicted. She never went hiking alone again. She told me that during one of our occasional check-ins. But she still hikes, still photographs the wilderness, still finds beauty in the forests, despite what happened to her. I admire that strength more than I can express. As for me, I transferred to a different sector of Olympic National Forest. I could not patrol the Enchanted Valley anymore, could not walk those trails without seeing Pike's face in every shadow and hearing his voice in every whisper of wind through the trees. Some of my colleagues thought I was running away, avoiding the trauma instead of confronting it. Maybe they were right, but survival is not always about facing your fears head-on. Sometimes it is about knowing when to retreat, when to find different ground, when to preserve your sanity by changing the battlefield. I still love the forest. I still believe in the importance of protecting these wild places and helping the people who visit them experience nature safely. But I am no longer naive about what can happen in the wilderness. The dangers are not just natural hazards and animal predators. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in the forest walks upright, speaks your language, and knows exactly how you think. Marcus Pike taught me that lesson in the cruelest way possible, and it is a lesson I carry with me every single day. On quiet nights when I am doing late patrols, I sometimes find myself looking over my shoulder, listening to the sounds of the forest with hyper-alert senses. Not because I think Pike is still out there. I watched him fall. I know he is dead, but because I know now that there might be others like him. Other predators who see the wilderness as their private hunting ground and other people as nothing more than prey. And if I am being completely honest, there is a part of me that wonders if Pike was right about one thing. Am I fundamentally changed by what happened? Did those 3 days in October transform me into something different, something harder and more suspicious and less trusting? I think they did. I think I will never see the forest the same way again. The shadows are deeper now. The silence is more threatening. The isolation feels like vulnerability instead of peace. But here is what Pike got wrong. Being changed does not mean being broken. Being wary does not mean being defeated. I survived, and Quinn survived, and we did it by fighting back against someone who thought he controlled our fates completely. There is power in that, in refusing to be prey, even when the odds are overwhelming. So yes, the forest is different for me now. It is darker, more dangerous, filled with shadows that might hide threats. But it is also still beautiful, still worth protecting, still capable of inspiring awe and wonder in those who approach it with respect. I just approach it differently now, with my eyes wide open and my instincts sharp, knowing that in these ancient groves beneath the towering Douglas firs and dripping moss, monsters can wear human faces, and the most dangerous predator is the one who knows your name. I transferred to the coastal sector last year, where the forest meets the Pacific and the sound of waves drowns out the whispers that still sometimes echo in my memory. On clear days, I can see across miles of old growth the same trees that were standing when this land belonged only to the Quinault and the Quileute, long before rangers or park boundaries or men like Marcus Pike tried to claim dominion over the wilderness. The forest was here before us, and it will be here long after we are gone. That is both a comfort and a reminder. We are all just temporary visitors in this place, and what we choose to do with our time here, whether we protect and preserve or exploit and destroy, that is what defines us. Pike chose to be a predator. I choose to be a guardian. And every day that I put on my uniform and patrol these trails, every hiker I help, every person I keep safe, that is my answer to what he tried to make me believe about human nature. We are not all monsters. We are not all predators. Some of us still believe in protecting the vulnerable, in standing between danger and the innocent, in using whatever strength we have to make the world slightly less terrifying for those who need help. But I keep my eyes open. I trust my instincts. And when I hear my name whispered from deep within the trees, I never, ever answer back. Because some lessons, once learned, stay with you forever. And the most important lesson I learned in the Enchanted Valley is this. Monsters are real. They walk among us, and the only thing standing between them and their prey is someone willing to fight back. Even when you are terrified, even when you are outmatched, even when every rational part of your brain is screaming to run. Sometimes you have to stand your ground and refuse to be prey, because if you do not, who will? That is what I think about now on my patrols, as the fog rolls through the coastal forests and the distant roar of the Pacific reminds me that nature is vast and indifferent and ultimately unknowable. I think about Quinn, fighting back even when it seemed hopeless. I think about Travis, making the hard choice to get help instead of dying heroically. I think about all the victims we found and all the ones we did not, all the people who walked into Pike's domain and never walked out. And I think about the moment on that ledge when I drove the stone shard into Pike's body and made the conscious choice to be a survivor instead of a victim. Was it the right choice? I do not know. Some nights, I lie awake wondering if there was another way, some path I did not see that would have ended differently. But most of the time, I think I did what I had to do. I think I made the only choice available to someone who wanted to live and wanted others to live. I think I became what I needed to become in that moment, and that is something I will have to carry for the rest of my life. The weight of it never gets lighter, but you learn to distribute the load, to keep moving forward, despite the burden. That is what survival looks like after trauma. Not victory, not healing, but persistence. The determination to keep going even when the forest seems dark and the shadows seem alive, and the voices in your memory whisper that you will never be safe again. Olympic National Forest is still one of the most beautiful places on Earth. Millions of years of geological formation, thousands of years of ecological development, centuries of growth and decay and renewal. It is a cathedral of living green, a testament to nature's resilience, a reminder that there are still wild places in this world where you can walk for days without seeing another human being. That beauty is real. But so is the danger. And if you ever find yourself hiking alone in the deep woods, if you ever hear footsteps that seem to match your own, if you ever feel eyes watching from the shadows, remember this: trust your instincts. Listen to that primitive part of your brain that evolved over millions of years to detect threats. And if something feels wrong, if your gut screams danger, you run. You run fast and far, and you do not look back until you reach safety. Because somewhere in these endless forests, there might be another Marcus Pike, another predator who sees hikers as prey and the wilderness as their personal hunting ground. I hope I am wrong. I hope Pike was a singular aberration, a unique combination of training and opportunity and mental illness that will never be repeated. But I have stopped trusting hope. Now I trust preparation, vigilance, and the hard-earned knowledge that evil exists, and sometimes it wears a ranger's uniform. So stay safe out there. File your trip plans, carry proper gear, hike with partners, and if you are ever missing and a ranger comes to find you, look closely at their eyes. Make sure you see humanity there, compassion, genuine desire to help. Because if you see something else, if you see the cold calculation of a predator sizing up prey, then you are not being rescued. You are being hunted, and your only chance is to recognize the danger before it is too late. That is my final lesson from the Enchanted Valley, learned in blood and fear and desperate survival. The wilderness is beautiful and deadly, and the line between the two is thinner than you think. Walk carefully, watch constantly, and never ever assume you are safe just because you are on a marked trail with a filed trip plan and proper equipment. Because Marcus Pike taught me that the most dangerous predator in any forest is not the cougar or the bear. It is the human being who has forgotten their humanity and embraced the darkness that lurks in all of us. I have seen that darkness. I have fought it. And I carry the scars, both visible and invisible, to prove it. The forest remembers what happened in the Enchanted Valley. The trees witnessed every moment of Pike's crimes, absorbed the fear and pain and death into their ancient rings. Sometimes I think I can feel that history when I walk through old growth, a weight in the air that has nothing to do with humidity or elevation. The forest remembers, and it does not forgive. But it also does not judge. It simply exists, vast and patient and ultimately indifferent to human concepts of good and evil. We impose our own meanings on the wilderness, project our fears and hopes onto the trees and mountains and rivers, but the forest does not care about our stories. It will outlast our memories, our monuments, our civilizations. Long after the last ranger has retired and the last trail marker has rotted away, these trees will still be standing, still growing, still hosting the eternal cycle of life and death that defines the natural world. That perspective helps sometimes. When the nightmares come, when I wake up gasping and drenched in sweat, convinced I can hear Pike's voice echoing through the darkness, I remind myself that in the grand scheme of geological time, my trauma is barely a footnote. The forest does not remember my fear. The mountains do not care about my pain. And there is something oddly comforting in that cosmic indifference, a reminder that my suffering, while real, is also temporary and ultimately insignificant in the vast sweep of natural history. But tell that to Quinn Ashford, who still flinches at unexpected sounds and cannot sleep without medication. Tell that to the families of Pike's victims, who finally got answers but will never get closure. Tell that to Brooke Hendricks, who spent her retirement consumed by guilt over clues she missed and warnings she did not heed. Our pain might be cosmically insignificant, but it is very real to us. And that is what I have learned about trauma. It does not care about perspective or cosmic significance or geological timescales. It exists in the immediate, visceral reality of flashbacks and panic attacks and hypervigilance that never quite goes away. I manage it. I function. I do my job and help people and maintain the facade of normalcy that society requires. But inside, there is still a part of me trapped on that cliff ledge, facing a predator who wants to see me die, making desperate choices with no good outcomes. That part of me never left the Enchanted Valley. It is still there, still fighting, still trying to survive. And maybe it always will be. Maybe that is the real cost of what happened. Not the physical scars, or even the psychological ones, but the fracturing of self into before and after, the creation of a version of me who will forever be fighting a battle that officially ended years ago. The new Rangers do not know the full story. They know there was an incident, know that a former Ranger went rogue and killed hikers, know that I was involved in stopping him. But they do not know the details. They do not know about the ledge or the choice or the moment when I drove stone into flesh and changed from Ranger to killer. I do not tell them. Some stories are too heavy to share, and besides, they need to love the forest the way I used to. They need to see beauty and wonder and natural majesty, not shadows and threats and potential predators. Their innocence is valuable, and I protect it the way I protect hikers on my patrols, by standing between them and the darkness, absorbing the trauma so they do not have to. Is that healthy? Probably not. My therapist would certainly say no, but it is what I do, and it is how I make meaning from what happened. If my suffering can preserve someone else's joy, if my vigilance can protect someone else's innocence, then maybe it was worth it. Maybe Pike was wrong, and there is more to human nature than predator and prey. Maybe there is also guardian, protector, the one who stands in the gap and says, not here, not today, not while I am still breathing. That is who I choose to be, not because it is easy or healthy or sustainable, but because it is necessary. Because the forest needs people who understand both its beauty and its dangers. Because hikers need rangers who will fight for them, even when the enemy is not a bear or a cliff, but a human being who has embraced their darkest impulses. And because somewhere out there, in the vast expanse of Olympic National Forest, there might be another Quinn Ashford, another innocent person who walked into the woods expecting adventure and found horror instead. If that happens, if another predator emerges from the shadows, I want to be ready. I want to be the ranger who sees the signs, who trusts their instincts, who acts before it is too late. I want to be the one who saves them, even if it costs me everything, even if it adds more scars to my collection, even if it pushes me further into the darkness I am trying so hard to avoid, because that is what it means to be a ranger in Olympic National Forest after Marcus Pike. It means carrying the knowledge that evil exists, that monsters are real, and that sometimes the only thing standing between innocence and horror is one person willing to fight. I am that person. For better or worse, that is who I have become. And as I walk these coastal trails with the Pacific roaring in the distance and the fog rolling through ancient trees, I carry that identity like armor, heavy, uncomfortable, but necessary for survival, mine and everyone else's. The forest speaks in many tongues. The whisper of wind through Sitka spruce, the drumming of rain on ancient cedars, the calls of creatures unseen. As a senior ranger for Tongass National Forest in southeastern Alaska, I learned to interpret these voices, but there are sounds that defy translation, utterances from something that does not belong in these woods. My name is Ron Whitman, and this is my account of what happened in the autumn of 1997. A record I have kept hidden until now, because some truths are too dark to share, and some things in the forest should never be disturbed. I always believed that becoming a park ranger in a place like the Tongass was the culmination of everything I had worked toward. 17 million acres of temperate rainforest, the largest national forest in the United States, a wilderness so vast and ancient that much of it remained unmapped, unexplored, unknown. The isolation that drove other rangers to request transfers after a single season was exactly what I craved. I had spent 12 years working various posts throughout the Pacific Northwest, but nothing prepared me for the sheer immensity of southeastern Alaska. The Tongass was not merely a forest. It was a primordial world unto itself, a place where glaciers carved fjords into the earth, where thousand-year-old trees rose like cathedral pillars toward a sky perpetually veiled in mist and rain. Before Alaska, I had served 5 years at Olympic National Park, another 3 at Mount Rainier, and shorter stints at various wilderness areas throughout Oregon and Washington. Each posting taught me something new about the relationship between humans and the wild places we presume to manage. But the Tongass was different. Here, the wilderness did not merely resist human intrusion, it actively consumed it. Structures left unattended for even a single season would be reclaimed by moss and undergrowth, swallowed whole by a forest that recognized no boundary between the living and the dead. I arrived in Ketchikan in March of 1997, transferring from a comfortable position at North Cascades to take over as senior ranger for one of the most remote districts in the Tongass. My supervisor, a weathered man named Carl Hendricks, who had spent nearly 4 decades in the Alaska wilderness, picked me up at the floatplane dock with a handshake that could crush stone. "Welcome to the end of the world, Whitman," he said, loading my gear into a battered Forest Service truck. "Hope you brought rain gear. We get over 100 inches a year out here." I had done my research. The Tongass received more annual precipitation than almost anywhere else in North America, creating a rainforest ecosystem that seemed more suited to the tropics than the northern reaches of the continent. But reading statistics in a warm office was nothing compared to experiencing the reality. Within hours of my arrival, a steady drizzle began that would continue, with brief interruptions, for the next 7 months. My first weeks passed in orientation, learning the waterways that served as highways through the roadless wilderness, memorizing the locations of emergency shelters and supply caches, studying maps of a landscape that changed with every tide and storm. The Tongass was not a single forest, but a vast archipelago of islands and mainland fingers separated by channels, straits, and sounds. Travel between stations often required boats or floatplanes, weather permitting, which in southeastern Alaska meant infrequently. Carl introduced me to the other rangers in our district, a skeleton crew of 5 tasked with monitoring an area larger than some states. There was Justin Marlowe, a quiet man in his late 30s who had grown up in Juneau and knew the forest with the intimacy of a native son. Kyle Patterson, younger and more enthusiastic, fresh from ranger school, and eager to prove himself in the most challenging environment the service offered. And Gabriel Reyes, a veteran like myself who had transferred from the Southwest and still seemed slightly bewildered by the perpetual dampness that seeped into everything. The others were seasonal workers who came and went with the brief tourist season, faces I would barely learn before they departed for warmer postings. But Justin, Kyle, Gabriel, and I formed the core of the district team, the ones who would remain through the long darkness of the Alaska winter. The spring and summer passed with a dreamlike quality. Despite the constant rain, there was a profound beauty to the Tongass that defied description. Ancient western red cedars draped in curtains of moss, their trunks so massive that 6 men could not link arms around them. Crystal streams thick with salmon returning to spawn, their bodies turning crimson as they completed the final journey of their lives. Brown bears fishing at the water's edge, eagles circling overhead, humpback whales breaching in the channels between islands. It was a wilderness photographer's paradise, and I filled notebook after notebook with observations and sketches. The tourists who ventured this far north were generally hardy souls, well prepared for the challenging conditions. We dealt with the usual issues, lost hikers, minor injuries, the occasional bear encounter, but nothing that suggested the horrors to come. By August, I had begun to feel that I had found my place, a wilderness vast enough to satisfy my need for solitude, challenging enough to keep complacency at bay. Then September arrived, and with it came the changes. The first sign was subtle, a shift in the forest's atmosphere that I initially attributed to the changing season. As summer's brief warmth faded, the Tongass took on a different character. Fog rolled in from the channels with increasing frequency, reducing visibility to mere yards. The rain intensified, driven sideways by winds that howled down from the mountains. Wildlife began its autumn patterns, bears gorging on the last salmon runs before hibernation, migratory birds gathering for their journey south. But there was something else, something I could not quite identify. An unease that settled over certain parts of the forest like a second layer of mist. The Tlingit people, who had inhabited these lands for thousands of years, spoke of places where the boundary between worlds grew thin. I had dismissed such talk as cultural mythology, the kind of colorful folklore that made for entertaining campfire stories. That dismissal would prove to be a mistake. The reports began in mid-September. Justin was the first to mention them, approaching me after our weekly briefing with an expression I had never seen on his normally impassive face. "Ron, we need to talk about Shelter Cove." Shelter Cove was a remote inlet on the eastern edge of our district, accessible only by boat or a brutal 2-day hike through some of the densest forest in the Tongass. A small emergency cabin had been maintained there for decades, a refuge for hunters, fishermen, or anyone else caught by the sudden storms that could materialize without warning. "What about it?" I asked, noting the tension in his shoulders. "3 separate parties have reported strange experiences there in the past month." Justin spread a map across my desk, pointing to the inlet. A fishing charter captain said his clients refused to go ashore after hearing sounds from the forest. Sounds they described as almost human, but wrong somehow. Like voices trying to form words they did not understand. "Could be wildlife," I offered. "Coyotes can make some unsettling noises, and we have wolves in that area." That is what I thought at first, but then a hunting party came through last week. 4 men, experienced outdoorsmen, all of them spooked badly enough to cut their trip short. They said something was watching them from the trees, following them. One of them swore he saw a figure at the edge of the firelight, tall and thin, moving in ways that did not match any animal he knew. I studied the map, tracing the contours of the land around Shelter Cove. The terrain was rugged, the forest some of the oldest in the Tongass. Places where humans rarely ventured, where the undergrowth grew so thick that passage was nearly impossible without cutting a trail. And the third report? Justin hesitated. A solo kayaker, woman named Sarah Chen. She was supposed to spend a week exploring the coast, experienced paddler, good equipment. She turned up at the Ketchikan harbor 3 days early, half her gear missing, would not tell anyone what happened, just kept saying she had to get away from the trees. She flew back to Seattle that same afternoon. "Has anyone checked the cabin? I was planning to go myself, but Carl suggested I talk to you first, given your seniority." What Carl meant, though Justin was too diplomatic to say it, was that my predecessor had been reluctant to investigate similar reports. I had heard whispers about strange incidents in the Tongass, stories that circulated among the rangers, but never made it into official records. Disappearances that were attributed to accidents or drownings, despite bodies never being recovered. Structures found damaged in ways that defied explanation. Equipment that failed at critical moments, as if the forest itself conspired against human presence. "I will go," I told Justin. "Draw me up a detailed route and arrange for boat transport to the inlet. I want to see this for myself." He nodded, relief evident in his posture. "I will have everything ready by tomorrow morning. And Ron, be careful out there. The Tlingit have names for that part of the forest, names they will not speak aloud." The next morning dawned gray and drizzling, typical September weather for southeastern Alaska. I loaded my gear into the small aluminum boat that would take me to Shelter Cove, checking and rechecking my supplies. Extra food, emergency beacon, first aid kit, waterproof matches, knife, radio, and, after a moment's hesitation, the service revolver I rarely carried. Something about Justin's warnings had lodged in my mind like a splinter. Kyle accompanied me on the boat, piloting through the maze of islands and channels with the confidence of someone raised on these waters. We spoke little during the 3-hour journey, the drone of the outboard motor filling the silence between us. The landscape slid past in shades of green and gray, towering spruces reflected in waters so still they seemed like polished obsidian. "You hear the stories too?" I finally said, watching Kyle's face for a reaction. He kept his eyes on the water ahead, navigating around a partially submerged log. "Everyone hears stories up here. Most of them are just that. Stories. But..." Kyle was quiet for a long moment. "My grandfather was Tlingit. Grew up in a village about 50 miles north of here, one of the old settlements before the government relocated everyone. He used to tell me about the Kushtaka. I had heard the word before, during my orientation, the Tlingit equivalent of the Wendigo legends from the northern forests of the lower 48 states. Shapeshifters, trickster spirits, creatures that lurked at the margins of the known world. You believe in them? I believe there are things in this forest that do not fit neatly into our categories." Kyle finally looked at me, his expression unreadable. "My grandfather said the Kushtaka could mimic human voices, lure people away from safety, trap them between worlds. He said some parts of the forest belong to them, not to us." "And Shelter Cove?" He did not answer, instead pointing ahead to where the inlet opened before us. The emergency cabin was visible on the shore, a small wooden structure that looked impossibly fragile against the immensity of the surrounding forest. Kyle brought the boat alongside a crude dock, the planks slick with rain and algae. "I will anchor in the bay overnight," he said as I gathered my gear. "Signal with your radio if you need extraction before tomorrow afternoon." I stepped onto the dock, feeling the weathered wood shift beneath my boots. The forest loomed before me, a wall of vegetation so dense it seemed almost solid. Somewhere in its depths, a raven called, the sound echoing across the still water. The cabin showed signs of recent use. Firewood stacked beside the small iron stove, canned goods arranged on rough-hewn shelves, a logbook where visitors recorded their stays. I flipped through the pages, reading the entries from the past several months. Most were routine, notes about weather, wildlife sightings, the condition of the trail. But the recent entries took on a different tone. September 3rd, beautiful morning, fog cleared by noon. Hiked to the waterfall, saw bear and cubs at distance. Evening, strange sounds from forest, like screaming, but not animal. Decided to sleep with fire burning, leaving tomorrow. September 8th. Something was at the window last night. Did not see it clearly, but there were marks on the glass this morning. Scratches, cutting trip short. September 12th. Do not stay here. Do not go into the forest alone. It watches, it waits, it speaks with voices that are not its own. The final entry was undated, written in a shaking hand that suggested extreme distress. It knows my name. I closed the logbook, a chill settling into my bones that had nothing to do with the damp air. Outside, the rain had intensified, drumming against the cabin roof in an endless rhythm. Through the single window, I could see the tree line perhaps 30 yards away, the ancient spruces rising into the mist like the columns of some vast abandoned temple. I spent the remaining daylight hours exploring the immediate area around the cabin, documenting everything with my camera and notebook. The structure itself was sound, no signs of animal intrusion or storm damage. But there were anomalies. Scratch marks on several trees near the clearing's edge, too high to be from bears, too deliberate in their pattern to be natural. Areas where the underbrush had been flattened in rough circles, as if something large had bedded down there. And a smell, faint but distinct, that hung in the air near the forest's edge. Something organic and wrong, like meat left too long in the sun mixed with the mineral sharpness of wet stone. As darkness fell, I retreated to the cabin and built a fire in the small stove. The warmth was welcome, but it did little to dispel the growing unease that had settled over me. Every sound from outside seemed amplified by the darkness, the rain, the wind, the creaking of ancient trees, the distant calls of nocturnal creatures. I ate a cold dinner of tinned beans and crackers, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by dreams that dissolved upon waking but left behind a residue of fear. At some point in the night, I woke to absolute silence. The rain had stopped, the wind had died, and even the usual sounds of the forest, the rustling of small animals, the hooting of owls, had ceased entirely. It was a silence so complete it seemed to press against my eardrums, a void where sound should have been. I lay still, hardly daring to breathe. Something was moving outside the cabin. Not the careless movement of wildlife passing through, but deliberate footsteps circling the structure. Slow, measured, patient. The rhythm was wrong somehow, not the 4-beat gait of a quadruped or the 2-beat stride of a human, but something irregular, as if whatever walked out there had too many legs or moved in ways that defied normal locomotion. The footsteps stopped directly outside the window. I reached for my revolver, the metal cold against my palm. Every instinct screamed at me to remain motionless, to make no sound that might attract attention. The silence stretched on, seconds bleeding into minutes. Then, just as my nerves were about to snap, a sound emerged from the darkness. It was my name, Ron, spoken in a voice that might have been human, but carried undertones that were distinctly not. The vowels stretched too long, the consonants clicked and clattered in ways that no throat should produce. Ron Whitman. Come outside. I did not move, did not respond. The voice called again, and this time I recognized something in its cadence. It was trying to mimic Carl's gruff baritone, but the imitation was imperfect, like a recording played at the wrong speed. The window was too small and too high for anything to see through easily, but I swore I could feel something peering in, studying me with eyes that did not belong to any creature I knew. The sensation of being watched was overwhelming, a pressure against my consciousness that bordered on physical pain. Then the footsteps resumed, circling away from the cabin and back toward the forest. The sounds faded slowly, and with their departure, the normal noises of the night returned. Rain began to patter against the roof once more. An owl called from somewhere in the distance. The spell of silence was broken. I did not sleep again that night. Morning arrived gray and sodden. the mist so thick that visibility dropped to perhaps 50 feet. I emerged from the cabin with my revolver drawn, scanning the clearing for any sign of my nocturnal visitor. The ground was soft from the constant rain, and near the cabin wall I found tracks. They were not human. They were not animal. Each impression was roughly circular, perhaps 8 inches in diameter, with smaller marks radiating outward like the toes of some impossibly large bird. But the spacing was wrong for any bird, too close together, and the depth suggested weight far greater than any avian creature in Alaska. The tracks circled the cabin 3 times before leading toward the forest, where they vanished into the undergrowth as if whatever made them had simply ceased to exist. Photographed everything, my hands trembling slightly as I worked. Then I radioed Kyle. "Coming out early," I said, keeping my voice steady with effort. "Meet me at the dock in 1 hour." "Understood." His response was immediate, no questions asked. Something in my tone must have conveyed enough. The boat ride back to Ketchikan was silent. Kyle took one look at my face when I boarded and said nothing, simply casting off and pointing us toward home. I spent the journey staring at the passing forest, trying to reconcile what I had experienced with any rational explanation, finding none. Carl was waiting at the dock when we arrived, his weathered face creased with concern. He listened to my report without interruption, studying the photographs I had taken with an expression that shifted from skepticism to something that looked uncomfortably like recognition. "You have seen this before," I said when I finished. "You know what made those tracks." Carl was silent for a long moment, then gestured for me to follow him to his office. He closed the door behind us and lowered the blinds before speaking. 23 years ago, I was a junior ranger assigned to a district about 50 miles north of here. We had a similar situation. Strange reports, missing hikers, sounds that did not match any wildlife. I was part of the search team that went looking for a family of 4 who had disappeared during a camping trip. He paused, reaching for a bottle in his desk drawer and pouring 2 glasses of whiskey. His hand was steady, but something in his eyes suggested the steadiness was practiced. We found their campsite intact. Food hanging from the bear line, tent properly secured, fire still smoldering. But the family was gone. Not a trace except for their boots, lined up neatly outside the tent, as if they had stepped out of them and vanished. What happened to them? Carl drained his glass before answering. Officially, they were listed as presumed drowned after falling into a glacial crevasse. Search called off after 2 weeks, but we kept finding things. A scrap of clothing here, a personal item there, always deeper in the forest, always leading toward places the Tlingit warned us never to go. And the sounds? The mimicry? I heard my own mother's voice calling from the woods one night. Carl's expression was haunted. She had been dead for 10 years by then. Whatever lives out there in the deep Tongass, Ron, it learns. It studies. It uses what it learns to draw people in. What is it? That I cannot tell you. The Tlingit have their explanations, Kushtaka. Spirits between worlds. Scientists would say impossible. Mass hysteria, auditory hallucinations caused by isolation and stress. But I know what I heard, and I know what I saw. There are things in this forest that should not exist, and our job is not to understand them. Our job is to keep people away from them. And if we cannot... Carl refilled his glass, the amber liquid catching the weak light from the window. Then we hope those people have enough sense to run. The conversation with Carl changed something fundamental in my understanding of the Tongass. I had come to Alaska seeking wilderness, seeking isolation, seeking an escape from the mundane rhythms of civilization. What I found instead was a landscape that harbored something beyond my comprehension, something that treated human presence as neither welcome nor entirely unwelcome, but rather as something to be studied, tested, and occasionally consumed. The weeks following my return from Shelter Cove were marked by an escalating pattern of incidents. Gabriel reported hearing his dead wife's voice during a solo patrol near Eagle Lake, calling him by the private nickname only she had used. Justin found a series of stone cairns arranged in a remote valley, their construction too precise for natural processes, their pattern suggesting some kind of communication or warning. Kyle discovered the remains of a deer near Salmon Creek, its body arranged with disturbing deliberation, organs separated and laid out in geometric patterns that bore no resemblance to natural predation. We documented everything, compiling a record of encounters that we kept separate from official reports. The higher-ups in Juneau would never believe what we were experiencing, and even if they did, what could they do? The Tongass was vast beyond comprehension, its deepest reaches inaccessible to all but the most determined explorers. Whatever dwelled there had existed long before humans arrived and would continue long after we were gone. October brought the first heavy storms of autumn, sheets of rain driven horizontally by winds that stripped leaves from deciduous trees and sent whitecaps racing across normally placid waters. Tourism ceased entirely, the last cruise ships and charter boats retreating south to warmer ports. We were alone now, the skeleton crew that maintained the district through the long darkness of the Alaska winter. It was during one of these storms that Gabriel disappeared. He had been assigned to check on a series of emergency supply caches in the interior, a routine task that should have taken 3 days. When he failed to check in on the evening of his second day, we assumed radio trouble, common in the mountainous terrain. But when the third day passed with no contact, concern became alarm. Justin and I organized the search, coordinating with the Coast Guard for helicopter support once the weather cleared. Kyle remained at the station to handle communications and coordinate any civilian assistance. We launched at first light on the 4th day, the helicopter banking over landscapes still dripping from the storm. We found Gabriel's boat anchored in a small cove about 20 miles from his intended route, its mooring line secured to a fallen log with textbook precision. His gear was aboard, neatly organized, missing only his pack, radio, and emergency supplies. Of Gabriel himself there was no sign. The helicopter dropped us at the cove, and Justin and I began tracking from there. The ground was soft from the rain, and we found his boot prints easily enough, leading inland along a game trail that wound through old-growth forest. The tracks were normal at first, the steady stride of an experienced woodsman making good time through familiar terrain. Then the tracks changed. About a mile inland, Gabriel's prints showed signs of hesitation. Shorter steps, frequent stops where his boots had pivoted as if he were looking around. Then, abruptly, the prints shifted from walking to running. Long strides, deep impressions in the mud, the desperate flight of someone fleeing for his life. We followed the running tracks for perhaps a quarter mile before they ended at the base of an enormous cedar. Not ended as in simply stopped, but ended as if Gabriel had reached that spot and ceased to exist. The final prints were facing the tree, as if he had turned to confront whatever pursued him. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, no disturbed vegetation. Just the abrupt termination of a trail that should have continued. Justin examined the tree while I searched the surrounding area for any indication of what had happened. He found scratches on the bark about 12 feet up, deep gouges in the wood that formed a pattern disturbingly similar to what I had seen at Shelter Cove. Something had climbed this tree, or descended it, with claws that could tear through wood like paper. "Run!" Justin called, his voice carrying a strain I had never heard from him before. "You need to see this." He was pointing upward, into the canopy where the cedar's massive boughs formed a lattice against the gray sky. At first, I could not understand what I was looking at. Then my eyes adjusted to the shadows, and my stomach lurched. Gabriel's pack was suspended about 60 feet up, wedged into a fork between branches too thin to support human weight. The fabric was torn, its contents scattered across the upper reaches of the tree like offerings arranged on an altar. Entangled in the branches beside it was something else, something that caught what little light penetrated the canopy and reflected it back with an oily sheen. It took us 3 hours to rig a rope system and retrieve what we could. The pack was mostly empty, its contents strewn too widely to recover. But the other object, the thing that had caught the light, we brought down. It was a piece of Gabriel. I say piece because there is no other word for it. A section of skin, roughly circular, perhaps 8 inches in diameter, removed with surgical precision from what must have been his back or side. There was no blood on it, no ragged edges to suggest tearing or biting. It had been cut, cleanly and deliberately, and then preserved somehow, the tissue maintaining a freshness that should have been impossible given the time elapsed. Justin wrapped it in plastic and secured it in my pack without a word. His face had gone pale beneath his tan, and his hands shook as he worked. Whatever stoicism he had maintained through years of wilderness service had cracked in the presence of that terrible artifact. We searched until darkness forced us to make camp, then resumed at dawn. 4 more days of systematic grid patterns through the forest yielded nothing. Gabriel was gone, as thoroughly as if he had never existed, leaving behind only that single piece of himself as evidence of his fate. The official report listed him as missing. Presumed dead, cause unknown. His family in Tucson received the news with the stunned incomprehension of people confronted by meaningless loss. We told them what we could, which was almost nothing. We did not tell them about the skin, which I had preserved in formaldehyde and hidden in my cabin, a secret shame that I could share with no one. The winter that followed was the longest of my life. Days shortened until we saw perhaps 4 hours of gray twilight between the long darkness of the Alaska night. Storms battered the coast with relentless fury, and we retreated into our stations like animals waiting out a siege. The three of us who remained, Justin, Kyle, and myself, grew closer through shared trauma. Yet there was always something unspoken between us, an acknowledgement of horrors we could not articulate. I began researching the history of disappearances in the Tongass, spending my off hours in the archives at Ketchikan, poring over records that stretched back to the territory's earliest days. What I found disturbed me more than anything I had yet experienced. People had been vanishing in these forests for as long as records existed. Native accounts spoke of hunters who followed game into forbidden territories and never returned. Russian fur traders documented mysterious losses among their parties that could not be attributed to hostile tribes or natural causes. American prospectors during the gold rush era reported companions who walked into the woods and simply ceased to be. The pattern was always the same: entry into specific areas of the forest, usually during periods of isolation or poor weather. Strange sounds preceding the disappearance. Belongings found intact, sometimes arranged with disturbing deliberation. Bodies never recovered, or recovered only in fragments that defied explanation. I compiled a map marking every disappearance I could document, and the result was chilling. The incidents clustered around specific locations, forming a rough boundary that encompassed some of the least accessible terrain in the Tongass. Shelter Cove was on that boundary. So was the valley where Gabriel had vanished. And at the center of the cluster, in a region so remote that even the most experienced rangers rarely ventured there, was a feature that appeared on no official maps. I found reference to it in an account written by a Russian Orthodox priest in 1847. He called it Chernoye Serdce, which translated roughly as Black Heart. According to his account, native guides refused to approach within 10 miles of the place, claiming it was the dwelling of a spirit that wore many faces and spoke with stolen voices. The priest himself attempted to reach it, motivated by missionary zeal to confront what he perceived as pagan superstition. His account ended mid-sentence, the remainder of his journal found months later in the wreckage of his camp, every page after that point blank. The winter wore on, and the incidents did not stop. Kyle reported finding a series of tracks outside his cabin one morning, the same circular impressions I had documented at Shelter Cove. Justin discovered that someone, or something, had been entering his storage shed at night, moving objects into patterns that seemed random but felt deliberate. And I continued to hear my name called from the forest, always in voices I recognized, always from directions that led deeper into the wilderness. By February, the strain was showing on all of us. Kyle had developed a nervous tremor that he tried unsuccessfully to hide. Justin had grown silent, spending his off hours studying Tlingit texts and consulting with elders who would speak to him about the forbidden places, and I had begun keeping a loaded revolver on my nightstand, though I knew instinctively that no weapon would protect me from what lurked in those woods. Then, in the last week of February, a hiker emerged from the forest near Ketchikan, stumbling into a waterfront bar in a state of complete disassociation. His name was Marcus Webb, and according to his driver's license, he was a 34-year-old accountant from Portland. According to his family, who were contacted after he was hospitalized, he had departed for a solo hiking trip in the Tongass 3 weeks earlier and was supposed to have returned 2 weeks ago. I interviewed him in his hospital room, watching his eyes dart to the window every few seconds as if expecting something to appear there. His account was fragmentary, punctuated by long silences and occasional fits of trembling, but what he described matched the pattern of experiences I had been documenting for months. He had hiked into the interior, following trails that were marked on his map, but seemed to shift and change as he traveled. On his 3rd day, he began hearing sounds, footsteps that followed his own, voices calling from just beyond the tree line. He tried to turn back, but the forest seemed to resist his efforts, paths looping back on themselves, landmarks appearing in the wrong places. On the 5th night, he saw it. Tall, he whispered, his voice barely audible. So tall, like a person stretched too far, arms too long, fingers like branches. It came to my tent and stood there. Just stood there. And it said my name. It said it in my mother's voice, and then my father's. And then voices I didn't recognize but knew somehow. People who were dead. People who were going to die. It knew things. Things it couldn't know. "What did you do?" I ran. His eyes found mine, and in them I saw a terror that transcended ordinary fear. I ran, and it let me. It could have caught me, I know it could have, but it let me go. It wanted me to go. It wanted me to tell people. Tell them what? That it's awake. That it's been sleeping for a long time, but now it's awake, and it's hungry. Marcus was transferred to a psychiatric facility in Anchorage 3 days later, his account officially attributed to hypothermia-induced psychosis. But I knew better. Whatever he had encountered in the Tongass was the same thing that had taken Gabriel, the same thing that had circled my cabin at Shelter Cove, the same thing that had been consuming people in these forests for as long as humans had ventured into them. The spring thaw brought a brief respite. Tourists returned to the waterways, cruise ships resumed their routes, and the constant presence of civilians seemed to push back whatever lurked in the forest. The incidents tapered off, though they never ceased entirely. A hiker here, a kayaker there, people who ventured too far from established trails and returned with stories they could not explain, or did not return at all. I should have left. Every rational instinct told me to request a transfer, to return to the lower 48 where the forests were smaller and the shadows did not move. But something kept me in the Tongass, a fascination that bordered on obsession. I needed to understand what we were dealing with. I needed to know if there was any way to stop it. It was Justin who first suggested the expedition, a journey into the heart of the restricted zone, to the place the Russians had called Chernoye Sertse. Not an official mission, but a personal quest to confront whatever dwelled there and document its existence. I knew it was foolish. I knew the risks. But I also knew that I could not spend the rest of my life wondering what lurked in those forbidden depths. We planned the trip for early May, when the weather would be most favorable and we could expect the longest days. Kyle refused to participate, his nerves too frayed by the winter's experiences, but he agreed to cover our duties and maintain radio contact as long as our equipment allowed. Justin and I assembled our gear with the meticulous attention of men preparing for combat, which in a sense we were. The journey took 3 days by boat and foot, following waterways and game trails that led ever deeper into the wilderness. The forest closed around us as we traveled, the canopy so dense that even midday felt like twilight. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow seemed to move. By the second night, we had both grown silent, conserving our energy for whatever awaited us. On the morning of the third day, we reached the boundary. There was no physical marker, no sign or fence to indicate that we had crossed into forbidden territory. But the change was unmistakable. The forest beyond was different, darker, older, a remnant of some primordial world that had existed before humans evolved to walk its floors. The trees here were immense, their trunks so massive that they seemed more like geological formations than living organisms, and the silence, the same pressing silence I had experienced at Shelter Cove, filled the air like a presence unto itself. "We should turn back," Justin said, his voice barely a whisper. "I can feel it watching us." I felt it too, that prickling sensation at the back of my neck, the unmistakable awareness of being observed by something unseen. But we had come too far to stop now. I shook my head and pressed forward, Justin following reluctantly behind. The terrain grew more difficult as we progressed, the undergrowth thickening into nearly impenetrable walls of brush and fern. We were forced to cut our way through in places, the machete strokes echoing through the stillness like gunshots. And with each step, the feeling of being watched intensified, as if the forest itself were tracking our movements with malevolent attention. We found the first body around midday. It was arranged against a tree, sitting upright with its back against the trunk, its legs extended before it as if resting. But the positioning was wrong somehow, too perfect, too deliberate, the limbs placed with an artist's attention to composition. And the body itself was wrong, withered and mummified despite the damp conditions. Its features stretched into an expression of such profound terror that I had to look away. The clothing suggested a hiker, perhaps from decades past, based on the style. There was no identification, no personal effects, just the body, preserved and displayed like a trophy in the heart of the forbidden forest. "This is a warning," Justin breathed, his face ashen. "It's showing us what happens to trespassers, or inviting us to stay." The thought came unbidden, and with it, a surge of fear that nearly sent me running back the way we had come. But I steadied myself, forced my breathing to slow, and examined the scene with what professional detachment I could muster. The bodies showed no signs of violence, no wounds, no marks of predation, nothing to indicate how the person had died. It was as if they had simply stopped living, their final moments frozen in an expression of absolute horror. We documented the sight and continued onward, the weight of dread increasing with every step. More bodies appeared as we progressed, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, arranged throughout the forest in poses that suggested some terrible purpose. Some sat against trees as the first had. Others hung from branches, their arms outstretched like scarecrows. Still others lay on the ground in fetal positions, their hands covering their faces as if to block out something too horrible to witness. They came from every era, these victims of the deep forest. Native clothing from centuries past, Russian fur trader garments, American frontier attire, modern hiking gear, a history of disappearances laid out before us like specimens in a museum, preserved by whatever force held dominion over this place. By late afternoon, we had reached what could only be described as a clearing, though that word fails to capture its nature. The trees simply ended, forming a rough circle perhaps 200 yards in diameter. At the center of this circle was a formation that defied geological explanation, a pillar of dark stone rising perhaps 30 feet from the forest floor, its surface covered in the same geometric scratches I had documented at Shelter Cove, now revealed as part of a vast and intricate pattern. The pillar pulsed, not visibly, not audibly, but in some sense that bypassed normal perception and spoke directly to the primitive regions of the brain that had kept our ancestors alive through countless generations of darkness and threat. It radiated wrongness, an emanation of alien consciousness that pressed against our minds like fingers probing for weakness. And around the pillar, arranged in concentric circles, were more bodies, hundreds of them, perhaps thousands. The accumulated harvest of centuries, positioned with obsessive precision, their dead eyes all focused on that central column of impossible stone. "Dear God," Justin whispered, his voice cracking with terror. "It's been feeding. All this time, it's been feeding. Not feeding." The thought came to me with horrible clarity, born of the research I had conducted over the long winter months. Storing. It's saving them. For something. We should have run then. Should have fled that place and never looked back. But before we could move, the silence shattered. It began as a vibration, a bass tone so low it was felt rather than heard. The pillar was glowing now, a sick phosphorescence that seemed to seep from within the stone rather than reflect from its surface, and from the forest behind us came sounds, the crash of massive bodies moving through undergrowth, the rustle of things too large for the trees they occupied, the whisper of stolen voices calling our names. Justin screamed something I could not understand and ran. I followed, instinct overriding reason, my legs pumping with desperate energy as the forest erupted into chaos around us. The creatures, I caught only glimpses of them in my peripheral vision, tall shapes moving between the trees, limbs extending and retracting in ways that defied anatomy, faces that shifted from human to animal to something that was neither. We ran for what felt like hours, though it could only have been minutes. The forest fought us at every turn, branches reaching out to snag our clothing, roots rising to trip our feet. And always behind us, around us, the sounds of pursuit, patient and relentless and utterly inhuman. Justin went down first. A root caught his ankle at precisely the wrong moment, sending him sprawling into a patch of ferns. I spun to help him, reaching for his outstretched hand, but something was already there, a shadow that unfolded from the undergrowth like a living thing, its form shifting and flowing as it engulfed him. His screams cut off with terrible abruptness, replaced by a silence that was somehow worse. I kept running. There was nothing I could do for him. Nothing anyone could do. The forest blurred around me as I fled, my lungs burning, my heart hammering against my ribs with such force I expected it to burst. And through it all, I heard them calling my name, in Justin's voice now, calling me to stop, to join them, to surrender to the darkness that had claimed so many before me. I do not know how I escaped. The memories blur into a montage of terror, running, falling, rising, running again. At some point, the sounds of pursuit faded. At some point, the forest released its grip. I emerged at the water's edge hours later, bloody and exhausted and more alone than I had ever been in my life. Kyle found me the next morning, delirious with shock and exposure. huddled in the ruins of an abandoned cannery several miles from our intended extraction point. He asked no questions, simply loaded me into the boat and piloted us back to Ketchikan, his face a mask of grim understanding. I resigned from the Forest Service the following week. The official explanation cited health concerns, which was true enough in its way, but the real reason was simpler. I had seen what lived in the Tongass, and I knew I could never set foot in that forest again. The years since have been a long exercise in attempted normalcy. I moved south, first to Seattle, then to Arizona, putting as much distance as possible between myself and the forests of the Pacific Northwest. I took a job selling insurance, the same work I had fled so many years before, finding comfort now in its mundane predictability. I married, divorced, married again. Built a life that looked from the outside like any other. But the Tongass never truly released me. I dream of it still, those endless depths of green and gray, those watching shadows, those voices calling my name in tones that are almost but not quite human. And sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, I hear them speaking of things yet to come, of an awakening that builds with each passing year, of a hunger that grows ever more insatiable. I have kept this account hidden for nearly 3 decades now. The world has changed since 1997, technology connecting us in ways that would have seemed miraculous then. People carry cameras in their pockets, share their every moment with global audiences. And yet the Tongass remains as it has always been, vast and ancient and utterly indifferent to human concerns. People still disappear there. I track the reports even now, from my safe distance in the desert southwest. Hikers who wander off marked trails and are never found. Kayakers whose boats are discovered empty and adrift. Researchers who venture into remote areas and simply cease to exist. The numbers are small, statistically insignificant against the thousands who visit the forest each year without incident. But I know what awaits those unlucky few who stray into forbidden territories. I know what watches from the shadows of those primordial trees. The Forest Service has protocols now, unofficial guidelines that warn rangers away from certain areas during certain seasons. They do not speak of them openly, but the knowledge passes from veteran to newcomer like a whispered inheritance. Do not go to Shelter Cove after September. Avoid the valleys east of Eagle Lake during the winter darkness. Never, under any circumstances, approach the region the old maps called Chernoy Sertsa. The Tlingit know. They have always known. Their legends speak of beings that existed before the world was shaped into its current form, entities that were not created, but simply were, waiting in the spaces between things for opportunities to reach into our reality. The Kushtaka are only the most familiar of these beings, trickster spirits that can be fooled or bargained with. But there are others, darker things that make no bargains and offer no mercy. Things that regard humanity as we might regard insects. Interesting specimens to be collected and studied and eventually consumed. I do not know what the pillar was. I do not know if it was a dwelling place, a feeding ground, or something else entirely, a doorway perhaps to wherever these entities originate. I know only that it pulsed with a consciousness older than the mountains that surrounded it, and that the bodies arranged in its orbit were offerings to an appetite beyond human comprehension. Kyle survived, though survival may be too generous a word. He left the Forest Service shortly after I did and moved to a monastery in New Mexico, seeking solace in faith that I have never been able to share. We spoke once, years later, and he told me he still hears them at night, the voices from the forest calling him back to the place where Gabriel fell, where Justin was taken, where so many others have been gathered into that terrible harvest. Sometimes I wonder if we were allowed to escape, if the creatures, whatever dwells in the heart of the Tongass, released us deliberately, knowing we would carry its message into the wider world, knowing that some who heard our account would dismiss it as fantasy, knowing that others would be drawn by that very dismissal, compelled to prove us wrong, to venture into the forbidden places where doubt becomes certainty and certainty becomes terror. If you are reading this, I implore you to heed my warning. The Tongass is beautiful, majestic, worthy of preservation and protection, but it is also a frontier between worlds, a boundary that was established long before humans existed and will persist long after we are gone. There are places within it that were never meant for human presence, depths that harbor entities we lack even the language to describe. Stay on the marked trails. Heed the warnings of the indigenous peoples who have learned through millennia of loss what places must be avoided. And if you ever find yourself in those ancient woods and hear a voice calling your name in tones that are familiar yet wrong, do not answer. Do not investigate. Run. Run and do not look back. Because some things in the forest are not content to be seen. Some things prefer to be the last thing you ever see. And some things, once they have your name, never stop calling. The forest speaks in many tongues. I know that now better than I ever wished to. And among those tongues are the voices of the lost, the taken, the gathered, crying out from whatever abyss has claimed them. Gabriel is among them now. Justin is among them. And sometimes, in my darkest moments, I wonder if I am among them too. If some essential part of myself remained in that clearing when my body fled. If what returned to civilization was merely a shell animated by the memory of a man who ceased to exist the moment he crossed into forbidden territory. I do not know the answers to these questions. I know only that the Tongass remains, vast and patient and eternally hungry, waiting for the next seeker who ventures too deep into its embrace. The forest keeps its secrets, and its secrets keep the forest, and somewhere in the silence between the ancient trees, something that should not exist continues its eternal vigil, collecting the unwary, storing its harvest, preparing for an awakening that draws closer with each passing year. This is my account. This is my warning. This is the truth I have carried for nearly 30 years, hidden away like the claw that still sits in my desk drawer, physical evidence of something that defies all evidence. Make of it what you will. But if you ever find yourself in southeastern Alaska, staring into the green depths of the Tongass National Forest, remember this. The forest is watching. The forest is always watching, and if you listen closely, you might hear it whisper your name. I wrote this account 3 weeks ago. I had intended to submit it anonymously, to let the world make of it what it would. But yesterday morning, I woke to find something on my doorstep that has changed my plans. It was a stone, smooth and dark, about the size of my fist. On its surface were carved the same geometric patterns I had seen on the pillar in the heart of the Tongass. And beneath it, folded with precise care, was a page torn from Justin's field notebook, his handwriting still legible despite nearly 3 decades of time. The message was simple. We are waiting. I do not know how they found me. I do not know how they reached across 2,000 miles of continent to deliver their message. But I know what it means. The patient hunters of the Tongass have not forgotten me. They have never forgotten any of us. The ones who saw and lived, the ones who carry their story into the wider world. My bags are packed. My affairs are in order. I am leaving this account with instructions that it be made public in the event of my disappearance. Not because I believe it will save anyone, but because some truths are too important to die with those who carry them. I am going back to the Tongass. Not because I want to, but because I no longer have a choice. They have called me. And one way or another, that call must be answered. Perhaps I will find answers in those ancient depths. Perhaps I will find only what so many others have found before me. A place among the gathered, a voice among the stolen, an eternity of existence in the shadow of that terrible pillar. Either way, I am going home. If you never hear from me again, remember the warning. Stay on the marked trails. Heed the voices of those who came before. And if the forest ever whispers your name, pray that it whispers to someone else instead. My name is Ron Whitman. I was a ranger in the Tongass National Forest in the autumn of 1997, and this is my final account of what waits in the dark heart of the wilderness. The forest is calling. I must answer.